Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Emily Hall, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the remote western regions of Virginia's Blue Ridge Mountains, near a place locals call Crow Hollow. I've always been drawn to places that most people avoid. The feeling of being completely alone in nature has been a comfort since my childhood. After my divorce last year, these solo hiking trips became more than just a hobby. They were my therapy, my way of proving to myself that I could be self-sufficient. My German Shepherd, Ranger, was the only companion I needed. He understood the healing power of silence better than any human I knew. This particular trip was meant to be a 4-day hike through a less-traveled section of the George Washington National Forest. I'd researched thoroughly, packed meticulously, and felt prepared. The weather forecast showed clear skies, unusual for late October, but a welcome break from the rain that had drenched Virginia for weeks. I parked my car at the Devil's Fork trailhead, a small gravel lot at the end of a narrow, winding road that even my GPS had trouble finding. Only one other vehicle sat in the lot, an old blue pickup truck with Virginia plates and a faded hunting sticker on the back window. I made a mental note of it, but wasn't concerned. The forest was vast, and encounters with other hikers were typically brief and pleasant. Ranger jumped eagerly from the back seat, his tail wagging as he sniffed the crisp autumn air. I shouldered my pack, checked my paper map one last time — I never fully trusted technology in the backcountry — and set off down the trail. The first day passed without incident. The trail wound through dense hardwood forest, the leaves a brilliant mosaic of reds and golds. Sunlight dappled through the canopy, and the only sounds were our footsteps crushing dried leaves, the occasional birdsong, and Ranger's contented panting. We covered about 8 miles before setting up camp in a small clearing near Black Rock Creek. After securing the tent, I gathered wood for a small fire, more for comfort than necessity. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped quickly. I fed Ranger, warmed some dehydrated pasta for myself, and sat watching the flames while sipping whiskey from my metal cup. The stars emerged overhead in that spectacular way they do when you're far from city lights. A glittering blanket spread across the black void. Around midnight, I doused the fire and crawled into my tent. Ranger curled up at the foot of my sleeping bag, a reassuring presence in the darkness. I fell asleep listening to the gentle babble of the creek. I woke suddenly, disoriented. The inside of the tent was pitch black and the silence was absolute. No wind in the trees, no creek sounds, no nocturnal creatures, just complete, suffocating stillness. Ranger was sitting upright, his body rigid, ears pricked forward. A low growl rumbled in his chest. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, reaching for my headlamp. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the tent's interior but revealing nothing unusual. Ranger continued to growl, his eyes fixed on the tent wall facing away from the creek. I strained my ears but heard nothing. Then, just as I was about to dismiss it as a passing deer or raccoon, a twig snapped outside, followed by what sounded like slow, deliberate footsteps circling our campsite. My heart hammered against my ribs. I reached for my hunting knife. Not much protection, but better than nothing. The footsteps continued their methodical circuit around the tent. Ranger's growl deepened, his hackles raised. I placed a cautioning hand on his back, afraid he might lunge through the tent fabric. "Hello?" I called out, trying to sound confident rather than terrified. "Is someone there?" The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Minutes passed. Ranger remained alert, occasionally twitching and refocusing on different sections of the tent wall, as if tracking movement outside. I sat completely still, knife clutched in my sweating palm, wondering what to do next. Then came a sound that turned my blood to ice. A low, chuffing noise, like something large sniffing at the base of the tent. It wasn't a bear. I'd encountered those before. This was different, less animal somehow, more deliberate. The fabric of the tent bulged inward slightly where the sound originated. Ranger lunged forward, barking ferociously. I grabbed his collar just in time, terrified of what might happen if he tore through the tent. Whatever was outside retreated. The footsteps receded into the forest, and after several more minutes of silence, the normal nighttime sounds slowly returned. The rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the burbling creek. I didn't sleep again that night. Ranger eventually settled but remained watchful, occasionally raising his head at sounds I couldn't detect. When the first gray light of dawn filtered through the tent fabric, I felt a profound sense of relief. I emerged cautiously, scanning the campsite for evidence of our nighttime visitor. Near the dead fire pit, I found what looked like footprints, larger than mine with an unusual gait that seemed to drag slightly on the left. They approached from the dense forest to the north, circled the tent exactly as I'd heard, and disappeared back in the same direction. As I prepared a hasty breakfast, I tried to rationalize. Probably just another hiker, disoriented in the darkness. Maybe they were lost and too shy or disoriented to announce themselves properly. The rational explanation calmed me, but something deep in my gut, some primal instinct, wasn't convinced. I decided to continue with my planned route but resolved to be more cautious about my camping locations. The second day's hike would take us deeper into the forest, to a ridge overlooking the valley beyond. The map showed an old fire tower at Raven's Point that might offer shelter and better security than a tent. We set off around 8 a.m. The trail grew steeper and less defined as we climbed. By midday, we'd gained considerable elevation, and the forest had changed from primarily deciduous to a mix of pine and hemlock that blocked more of the sunlight. The temperature was noticeably cooler, and a thin mist clung to the ground in shadowed areas. Around 2 p.m., we reached a fork not marked on my map. The main trail continued straight, following the contour of the ridge. A narrower path branched off to the left, descending slightly into a densely wooded hollow. A faded wooden sign, its paint peeling and text barely legible, pointed down this secondary path. Stillwater Hollow, 1.5 miles. I didn't recall seeing Stillwater Hollow in my research, but it wasn't unusual for older trails and landmarks to be omitted from newer maps. I consulted my compass and determined that this path would eventually reconnect with my planned route further north. It looked less steep than continuing along the ridge and might save us some time. As we descended the path into the hollow, the forest grew noticeably darker and more humid. The trees here were ancient, massive trunks covered in thick moss, their upper branches forming a canopy so dense that only occasional shafts of sunlight penetrated to the forest floor. The ground was soft and springy underfoot, covered in a thick carpet of decaying leaves and pine needles. Ranger stayed unusually close to my side, occasionally whining softly, behavior completely unlike him. When I stopped to check the map and compass again, he pressed against my leg, his body tense. "It's okay, boy," I murmured, though I was beginning to share his unease. Something about this hollow felt wrong. The air was too still, the silence too complete. No birds called, no squirrels scampered through the underbrush. Even the insects were quiet. We continued downward for another half hour. According to my calculations, we should have reached Stillwater Hollow by now, but the path simply continued its gradual descent into increasingly dense forest. I was about to turn back when the trail suddenly opened into a small clearing. In the center stood the remains of a cabin. Its log walls were partially collapsed, the roof long gone, leaving only a jagged skeleton of support beams. Nature had begun to reclaim it. Vines crawled up the remaining walls, and mushrooms sprouted from the rotting wood. Next to the cabin was a well, its stone circle intact, but the wooden cover rotted away, leaving a dark opening like a mouth to the underworld. A rusted bucket lay on its side nearby. I approached cautiously, curious despite my growing sense of discomfort. This place had been abandoned for decades, yet something about it suggested an abrupt departure rather than a gradual abandonment. Through one of the glassless windows, I could see an old iron cook stove, dishes still stacked on a sagging shelf, a table with a chair overturned beside it. "Hello?" I called, though I knew the cabin was long deserted. My voice sounded muffled, as if the thick air absorbed the sound. Ranger refused to approach the cabin. He stood at the edge of the clearing, tail down, ears flattened against his head. When I tried to coax him closer, he backed away, whining. I decided to investigate quickly and then move on. We still had several hours of daylight left, and I wanted to reach the fire tower before dusk. Inside the cabin, the air was stale and heavy with the scent of mold and decay. Dust motes swirled in the shafts of light that penetrated the collapsed sections of roof. The floor creaked ominously beneath my boots. On the table lay an open book, its pages yellow and warped from exposure to the elements. I brushed away the dust carefully. It appeared to be a journal, the handwriting spidery and faded. Most of the entries were illegible, but one caught my eye, dated October 17th, 1932. They're getting closer. I can hear them at night, scratching at the walls. Martha says I'm imagining things, but I've seen the tracks around the well. Not human, not animal. Something else. The Stillwater folk warn us not to go near the cave. But we need water. What choice do we have? The children are thirsty. The entry ended there. I flipped through the remaining pages, but they were either blank or too damaged to read. A sudden crash from outside made me jump. I rushed to the doorway to see Ranger barking frantically at the well. The rusted bucket, which had been lying on its side, was now upright beside the stone circle. "Ranger, come," I called sharply. For the first time ever, he ignored my command, continuing to bark at the well with increasing agitation. I moved quickly toward him, and as I approached, I heard it. A soft splashing sound from deep within the well, as if something was moving in the water below. Ranger's barking reached a fever pitch. I grabbed his collar and pulled him away from the well, my heart pounding in my chest. As we backed toward the trail, the splashing grew louder, and then silence. We fled. I didn't stop until we'd climbed back up to the main ridge trail, Ranger keeping pace beside me. By then, the afternoon was waning, and I knew we wouldn't reach the fire tower before dark. I needed to find a campsite, though the thought of spending another night in a tent after what happened at the cabin filled me with dread. About a mile further along the ridge, I found a relatively flat area sheltered by a rocky outcrop. It offered some protection at our backs and a clear view of the approach from all other directions. It would have to do. I set up camp with mechanical efficiency, my mind still processing what had happened at the abandoned cabin. Ranger seemed calmer now that we were away from the hollow, but he remained vigilant, his eyes frequently scanning the darkening forest. As night fell, I didn't bother with a fire. I wanted to attract as little attention as possible. I ate a cold dinner of trail mix and beef jerky, sharing some with Ranger, and we settled in for what I hoped would be an uneventful night. Sleep came in fitful bursts. Each time I drifted off, I jerked awake at the slightest sound, a pine cone falling, the creak of branches in the gentle night breeze. Ranger slept pressed against me, occasionally twitching and whimpering in his dreams. Sometime around midnight I woke to absolute silence again. That same unnatural stillness we'd experienced the previous night enveloped the forest. Ranger was awake and alert, his muscles tense beneath his fur, but he wasn't growling, almost as if he was too frightened to make a sound. Then I heard it, footsteps approaching our campsite. The same slow, deliberate gait with the slight drag on the left. But this time, they didn't circle the tent. They stopped just outside the entrance. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the cold. I reached for my knife with a trembling hand. "I know you're in there, Emily." The voice was male, low and raspy, as if rarely used. "You shouldn't have come to Stillwater." My blood turned to ice. I hadn't told anyone my name or my planned route. I hadn't seen another soul since beginning the hike. "What do you want?" I managed to ask, my voice surprisingly steady despite the terror coursing through me. A pause. "You woke it up. At the well. They've been sleeping for years, but you woke them. Now they'll want feeding." "I don't understand," I said, my mind racing. "Who are you?" "Name's Elijah Thornton. Been watching these woods for 40 years, keeping people away from the hollow. Didn't see you turn down that path until it was too late." Ranger's body was coiled like a spring beside me. I kept one hand firmly on his collar. "What's in the well?" I asked, not sure I wanted to know the answer. The man, Elijah, sighed heavily. "Folks around here don't talk about it much. Back in the mining days, there was a cave-in. 7 men trapped. Rescue party went in, never came out. They sealed the main entrance, but there's ways in through the hollow, through the well. What does that have to do with me?" My mouth was dry, heart hammering. "They're hungry, always hungry. Usually I keep hikers away from there, but you went right in, and now they've got your scent." A chill ran up my spine. "What are they?" "Don't rightly know. Not men anymore, that's certain. Been down there too long. Changed." He paused. "Listen, I can help you get out of these woods, but we need to move. Now. They don't much like the daylight, but they'll be coming soon." I considered my options. This strange man could be the actual threat, a deranged local with a penchant for terrorizing hikers. But my instincts told me he was genuinely afraid, and of something worse than him. "How do I know I can trust you?" I asked. "You don't, but you're a good 2 days from the nearest road and they know where you are. Your choice." I made a split-second decision. "Give me 5 minutes to pack up." "Make it 3, he replied grimly. I stuffed my sleeping bag and essential gear into my pack as quickly as possible, leaving the tent behind. When I emerged, I got my first look at Elijah Thornton. He was tall and gaunt, with a long gray beard and weathered skin that had seen decades of sun and wind. He wore faded canvas pants and a heavy wool jacket despite the relatively mild night. A shotgun was cradled in his arms, and a large hunting knife hung from his belt. His left foot dragged slightly as he shifted his weight, explaining the distinctive gait I'd heard. "The blue pickup at the trailhead," I said. "That's yours." He nodded. "Been watching these woods for a long time. Come on." Elijah led us away from the ridge, following a barely visible game trail that switchbacked steeply down the mountainside. He moved with surprising speed despite his limp, navigating the dark forest with the confidence of someone who knew every tree and rock. Ranger stayed close to my side, occasionally glancing back the way we'd come. His behavior toward Elijah was curious, neither friendly nor aggressive, but watchful, as if assessing him. After about an hour of silent, rapid travel, Elijah finally spoke again. "We're heading to my cabin. It's safe, built on hallowed ground, blessed by a preacher from Blackwater. They can't come near it." "Who are they exactly?" I pressed. "You said they were miners?" Elijah's pace didn't slow as he answered. "Started that way. Men trapped in the collapse of 52. Mine company said they all died in the initial cave-in, but that wasn't true. They survived for weeks down there. No light, no real food. Started eating. Things they shouldn't. Changed them." "Changed how?" I wasn't sure I wanted details, but I needed to understand what we were running from. "They ain't human no more. That's all you need to know." His tone made it clear the subject was closed. We continued in silence for another hour. The terrain gradually leveled out, and the forest became less dense. Eventually, we emerged into a small clearing where a sturdy log cabin stood. Unlike the ruined structure in Stillwater Hollow, this one was well maintained, with a stone chimney and small windows covered by heavy wooden shutters. Elijah unlocked the door and ushered us inside, quickly securing it behind us. The interior was simple but comfortable. A wood stove in one corner, a rough-hewn table and chairs, shelves stocked with preserved foods, and a narrow bed against the far wall. Kerosene lamps cast a warm glow over everything. "You'll be safe here till morning," he said, setting his shotgun on a rack by the door. Then I'll take you back to your car." I sank gratefully into one of the chairs, my legs trembling from the forced march through the dark forest. Ranger collapsed at my feet with an exhausted sigh. "Thank you," I said simply. Elijah nodded, busying himself with lighting the stove. "You hungry?" I realized I was starving. "Yes, thank you." As he prepared a simple meal of beans and canned meat, I studied him more closely. Despite his rough appearance, there was something refined about his movements, his speech. He didn't fit the stereotype of an isolated mountain man. "You're not from around here originally, are you?" I asked. A sad smile briefly crossed his weathered face. "Georgetown University, class of '78, anthropology, came here to study Appalachian folklore, never left." "Because of them?" He placed a steaming plate in front of me. "Eat, we'll talk after." The food was plain but delicious after days of trail rations. Elijah fed Ranger too, earning a tentative tail wag from my normally reserved companion. After we'd eaten, Elijah poured 2 glasses of amber liquid from an unmarked bottle. "Moonshine," he said. "Made it myself." I took a cautious sip. It was surprisingly smooth, with hints of honey and spice beneath the alcohol burn. Elijah settled into the chair opposite me, nursing his own drink. "I came here in '82 to research local legends. The usual stuff: ghost stories, folk healing, superstitions. Heard whispers about Stillwater Hollow but couldn't get anyone to talk details. So I went exploring on my own." He rolled up his left sleeve, revealing a badly scarred forearm. "Found the well. Found what lives down there. Barely escaped. My research partner David wasn't so lucky." His voice was flat, emotionless, but I could sense the decades of pain beneath the words. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "Been here ever since, keeping watch. Local folks know to stay away, but outsiders, hikers, campers, hunters, they don't know the danger. I try to intercept them, steer them away from the hollow." He looked at me intently. "But you went straight to the cabin, right to the well." "I was just following the trail," I protested. "The sign said Stillwater Hollow." Elijah frowned. "There's no sign. Haven't been for 30 years at least." A chill ran through me. There was a wooden sign at the fork, faded but readable. He shook his head slowly. "They're getting craftier, using lures now." He drained his glass. "What exactly did you do at the well?" I described our visit to the abandoned cabin, finding the journal, hearing the splashing in the well. With each detail, Elijah's expression grew grimmer. "The journal's new," he said when I finished. "Wasn't there last time I checked the place, about a month ago. They're setting baits, making people curious." He refilled his glass. "And you say the bucket moved on its own?" I nodded. "That's bad. Real bad. Means they're stronger than they used to be. More present in our world." "What exactly are they?" I asked again. "You said they were miners once." Elijah stared into his glass. "You ever hear of the Wendigo? Indigenous legend. A human who's consumed human flesh and becomes something else. Something that's always hungry, always hunting." My blood ran cold. "Are you saying—" "Not exactly Wendigos, no. Something similar maybe. Men who were trapped, starving. When their rations ran out, they turned on each other. But there was something else down in that mine. Something older. It joined with them somehow." He looked up at me, his eyes haunted. "I've seen one of them just once. Looked almost human but stretched, wrong. Skin like wet paper. Too many teeth. Eyes that—" He shuddered. "Let's just say they ain't men anymore, and leave it at that." We sat in silence for a while, the implications of his story settling heavily around us. The more rational part of my mind wanted to dismiss it as the delusions of an isolated man who'd spent too many years alone in the wilderness. But I couldn't explain the unnatural silence in the forest, the footsteps around my tent, the voice that knew my name, the moved bucket at the well. "Try to get some sleep," Elijah finally said, rising from his chair. "We'll leave at first light. I'll take the first watch." He offered me the bed, but I declined, preferring to spread my sleeping bag on the floor near the stove with Ranger beside me. Despite my exhaustion, sleep was elusive. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind outside sounded ominous in the wake of Elijah's story. When I finally drifted off, my dreams were troubled. Dark tunnels, echoing splashes, pale figures with too many teeth pursuing me through endless forests. I woke suddenly to Ranger's low growl. The cabin was dark except for the faint glow of embers in the stove. Elijah was at one of the windows, a sliver of the shutter open, his shotgun ready. "What is it?" I whispered, reaching for my knife. "They followed us," he replied, his voice barely audible. "3 of them, circling." I joined him at the window, peering through the narrow gap. At first, I saw nothing but darkness. Then a pale shape moved at the edge of the clearing. Humanoid but wrong, somehow, its proportions subtly distorted, its movements jerky and unnatural. "I thought you said they couldn't come near the cabin," I hissed. "They can't, but they can wait." Elijah closed the shutter. "We're safe in here, but we're also trapped until daylight." As if to confirm his words, a sound rose from outside, a high, keening wail that was neither human nor animal, filled with hunger and rage. Ranger pressed against my leg, trembling. "They've never been this bold before," Elijah muttered, moving to check the other windows. "Never come this far from the hollow." Another cry joined the first, then a third, a discordant chorus that raised the hair on the back of my neck. "What do they want?" I asked, though I feared I knew the answer. Elijah gave me a level look. "Food." The night passed in tense vigilance. The creatures circled the cabin until just before dawn, occasionally testing the doors and shutters, their inhuman cries growing more frustrated as they found no way in. As the first gray light appeared in the east, the sounds receded, and Elijah confirmed they had retreated into the forest. "They don't like daylight," he explained as we hurriedly gathered our things. "Burns their skin after so long in the darkness. They'll head back to the hollow, to the caves. That's our chance." We left as soon as it was fully light, moving at a brisk pace through the forest. Elijah led us on a roundabout route that avoided the hollow entirely, adding miles to our journey but keeping us on higher, more open ground. By mid-afternoon, we reached a ridge that offered a view of the valley below. In the distance, I could just make out the gravel parking area where I'd left my car 3 days ago. "About 2 more hours," Elijah said, surveying the terrain ahead. "We'll make it before sunset." As we began our descent, I asked the question that had been nagging at me all day. "Why are you helping me? You don't know me." Elijah walked in silence for several steps before answering. "Couldn't save David. Couldn't save the others who wandered too close over the years. Maybe I can save you." He glanced at me briefly. "Besides, you woke something up down there, made it angry. I need to know why." "I told you everything that happened," I insisted. "You did," he agreed, "but it doesn't make sense. Why you? Why now? They've been dormant for years. Something changed." We continued downward in thoughtful silence. The forest here was healthier, filled with the normal sounds of birds and small animals. Ranger's demeanor had improved, too, his tail up, ears forward, occasionally darting off the trail to investigate interesting scents. As the sun began to dip toward the western horizon, we finally emerged from the forest onto the gravel road leading to the parking area. Relief flooded through me at the sight of my car, still parked exactly where I'd left it. "Thank you," I said to Elijah as we approached the lot. "I don't know what would have happened if—" I stopped mid-sentence, noticing what was wrong. The blue pickup truck that had been parked next to my car when I arrived was gone. Elijah had noticed, too. He stopped walking, his body suddenly tense. "That's not possible," he muttered. "I left it right there, 3 days ago. A cold feeling spread through my chest. Elijah, when was the last time you were at your cabin before last night? He frowned. Couple days ago. Why? And the pickup, when did you park it here? When I came to check the trailheads. Monday morning. His eyes narrowed. What are you getting at? I arrived Monday afternoon, I said slowly. The blue pickup was already here when I parked. If you left it Monday morning, then went back to your cabin. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Then who was watching us from the ridge? Who led you to the hollow? As if in answer, the unnatural silence descended again. That absolute stillness that had preceded each encounter with the strange phenomena. Ranger's hackles rose, and he pressed against my leg, growling softly. "Run," Elijah whispered, raising his shotgun. "Get to your car. Drive away from here and don't look back." "What about you?" I asked, already backing toward my vehicle. "I'll hold them off. Go." I ran the last 20 yards to my car, fumbling with shaking hands to unlock it. As I wrenched open the door, a shot rang out behind me, followed by Elijah's shout of surprise. I turned to see him backing away from the tree line, shotgun raised. At the edge of the forest stood a figure, humanoid but wrong, its limbs too long, its movements jerky and uncoordinated. Its skin was a pallid gray, stretched too tight over a frame that seemed composed of too many angles. Where its face should have been was a distorted parody of human features with a mouth that stretched impossibly wide, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. 2 more figures emerged from the trees, flanking the first. One of them moved with a distinctive drag to its left foot. "Elijah!" I screamed. "Run!" He fired again, the blast catching one of the creatures in what passed for its chest. It staggered but didn't fall, black ichor oozing from the wound. "Get out of here," he shouted, backing toward me. "I'll hold them." The creature with the dragging foot lunged forward with impossible speed, closing the distance between them in a blur of motion. Its elongated arms wrapped around Elijah, and its distorted mouth gaped open. I couldn't look away as it bent its head to his neck. Elijah's scream cut through the air, then choked off abruptly. The creature raised its head, black liquid dripping from its mouth. When it turned toward me, I saw its face clearly for the first time. Despite the distortions, despite the inhuman features, I recognized the weathered skin, the gray beard now matted with black fluid. It was Elijah's face, or something wearing it like an ill-fitting mask. I scrambled into my car, Ranger leaping in after me. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As the engine roared to life, the 3 figures began moving toward us with that same jerky, uncoordinated gait. I slammed the car into reverse, tires spitting gravel. In the rearview mirror, I saw them stop at the edge of the parking area, watching us retreat. The one with Elijah's face raised a hand in what almost seemed like a farewell. I drove without stopping, first backward down the gravel road, then forward once I reached the paved highway, pushing my car to its limits. It wasn't until I reached the outskirts of Blackwater, nearly 40 miles away, that I finally pulled over, my hands cramping from their death grip on the steering wheel. Ranger whined softly from the passenger seat, pressing his warm body against mine as tears streamed down my face. I reported Elijah missing to the local sheriff, claiming we'd been hiking together when he disappeared. They took my statement with polite skepticism, clearly assuming he was just another eccentric mountain man who'd wandered off. When I mentioned Stillwater Hollow, the deputy's face changed just for a moment. Not surprise, but recognition, quickly masked by professional detachment. They promised to look into it, but I knew they wouldn't. Some things are better left alone. I've done my research since then. There was a mine collapse in 1952 near what's now called Stillwater Hollow. 7 men trapped, presumed dead. There was a Georgetown anthropology graduate named Elijah Thornton, who disappeared in the Blue Ridge Mountains in 1982 while researching local folklore. His research partner, David Wallace, was found wandering on a highway 3 days later, incoherent and badly injured. He died in a psychiatric hospital in 1985, still raving about the things in the dark that wear men's faces. I don't go hiking alone anymore. Ranger and I stick to populated trails and we're always home before dark, but sometimes, in my dreams, I hear that unnatural silence falling, feel the weight of hungry eyes watching from the trees, and I wonder about the journal I found in that abandoned cabin, with its warnings about things that aren't human, aren't animal, coming up from the darkness below. I wonder if my name is written in it now, another entry in a long history of those who ventured too close to Stillwater Hollow. Another story whispered around campfires, about the woman who went hiking in the Blue Ridge Mountains and met a man named Elijah Thornton, a man who's been dead for 40 years. Sometimes I check the local news from that region of Virginia. Every few years, there's a brief mention of a hiker gone missing, a camper who never returned to their vehicle. The searches are always called off too quickly, the cases filed away and forgotten. And I wonder if they found the trail to Stillwater Hollow, if they saw the cabin and the well, if they heard the splashing from far below and were curious enough to look. I wonder if they met Elijah, or whatever has been wearing his face for the past 40 years. My name is Rebecca Hill, and I am 29 years old. This happened in the George Washington National Forest, Virginia, just last summer. I've always been the adventurous type. Growing up in Richmond with parents who barely left the city limits, I promised myself I'd explore every inch of Virginia once I had the means. When I landed that marketing job in D.C., the first thing I bought was serious hiking gear. Not the fashionable stuff you see influencers wearing, real practical equipment for someone who intended to disappear into the wilderness whenever possible. The George Washington National Forest had been on my bucket list for years. Over 1.8 million acres of wilderness spanning across the Appalachian Mountains, with hundreds of trails ranging from casual walks to challenging multi-day hikes. I'd done plenty of day hikes there, but this time I wanted something more immersive, a 5-day solo backpacking trip along the more remote eastern ridges. My friends thought I was insane. "You're going alone?" Maya had asked, her eyes wide with concern when I mentioned it during happy hour. Like, completely alone? "That's the whole point," I'd responded, taking a sip of my beer. No people, no phones, no emails, just me and nature. "And serial killers," Derek added with a smirk. "Don't forget those." I'd rolled my eyes at him. "There are far more dangerous things in the city than in the woods." If only I'd known how wrong I was. The morning I set out was perfect. Crisp autumn air, clear skies, the smell of pine and fallen leaves. I parked my Subaru at the Hollow Pines trailhead, a lesser-known entry point about 30 miles west of Staunton. The parking area was empty except for a single pickup truck with West Virginia plates. Good. I wanted solitude. I double-checked my pack: tent, sleeping bag, water filter, first aid kit, maps, compass, food for 6 days, one extra for emergencies, extra socks, rain gear, knife, headlamp, batteries, everything I needed to survive comfortably, weighing in at 34 pounds. Not light, but manageable for someone who'd been training with weighted pack hikes for months. The trail started gently enough, winding through old-growth forest with towering pines and oaks that filtered the morning sunlight into dappled patterns on the ground. The first few miles were pure bliss, just the sound of my boots on the path, birds calling overhead, and the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush. I felt the weight of the city sliding off my shoulders with each step. By midday, I'd covered about 7 miles, climbing steadily higher along Crow Ridge, one of the less-traveled paths that eventually connected to the Appalachian Trail. I stopped for lunch at a small clearing with a view of the valley below, endless waves of trees painted in autumn colors stretching to the horizon. This was why I came. This perfect moment of solitude and beauty. As I was packing up to continue, I noticed a flash of movement in the trees about 50 yards downslope. I froze, watching. A deer, probably, or maybe a bear. The forest was thick with wildlife. but whatever it was had moved in a way that seemed deliberate. Not the casual meandering of an animal, but the purposeful movement of something that didn't want to be seen. I dismissed the thought. My city brain was still active, seeing threats where there were none. I hoisted my pack and continued up the trail. The path grew steeper and narrower as the afternoon wore on, the trees closing in on either side until they formed a tunnel of green. The forest felt different here, older, quieter. Even the bird song had faded away, leaving nothing but the sound of my breathing and the crunch of leaves beneath my boots. Around 4 o'clock, I came across something unexpected. A small cabin set back from the trail about 20 yards. It wasn't marked on my map, which was unusual. The Forest Service typically documented all structures. It looked old but well-maintained, with a stone chimney and a small covered porch. Curiosity got the better of me. I stepped off the trail and approached, calling out as I got closer. "Hello? Anyone home?" No answer. The windows were dark and the place had that still, empty feeling of an unoccupied building. I climbed the steps to the porch and peered through the front window, cupping my hands around my eyes to block the glare. Simple furnishings: a table, 2 chairs, a wood stove, some shelves with books and canned goods. A hunter's cabin, probably, or maybe an old ranger station that had been repurposed. Nothing sinister, just unexpected. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A small carving in the wooden post supporting the porch roof. I leaned closer to examine it. It was a symbol I didn't recognize. A circle with a vertical line through it, and what looked like 3 smaller circles arranged within the larger one. Below it, carved in tiny, neat letters, were the words, "She walks at night." A chill ran down my spine despite the warm afternoon sun. Probably just local folklore or some hunter's superstition. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched as I made my way back to the trail. By sunset, I'd reached my planned camping spot, a small plateau with a natural clearing that offered protection from the wind and a spectacular view of the western ridge. I set up camp efficiently, having practiced many times in my backyard and on shorter trips. Tent secured, sleeping pad and bag arranged inside, food hung safely from a tree branch away from my sleeping area. Black bears were common in these parts. As darkness fell, I boiled water on my small camp stove for a rehydrated meal of pasta primavera. The forest grew louder as night settled in. Frogs, insects, the occasional hoot of an owl. Normal nocturnal sounds that I found comforting rather than frightening. After dinner, I sat outside my tent, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. Out here, away from city lights, the Milky Way spread across the heavens in a breathtaking display. I felt small beneath it, but connected to something greater. This was why I came to the wilderness, to remember my place in the natural world. I must have dozed off because I woke with a start, my neck stiff from leaning against my backpack. The forest had gone completely silent. No insects, no frogs, nothing. Just absolute oppressive silence. That's never a good sign in the woods. I sat up straight, suddenly alert, scanning the darkness beyond my small clearing. My headlamp illuminated only a few feet in front of me, the surrounding forest an impenetrable wall of black. Then I heard it, a twig snapping, somewhere to my left. Then another, closer this time. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding thin and uncertain in the quiet night. "Is someone there?" No response, just another snap, closer still. My heart began to pound. It could be anything. A deer, a raccoon, even a bear. I should make noise, let it know I was here. Wild animals usually avoided humans if given the chance. I stood up, making myself as large as possible. "Hey, I'm over here," I called loudly, clapping my hands together. The snapping stopped. Silence returned, heavier than before. Then, from much closer than I expected, came a sound that turned my blood to ice. A low, wet breathing. Not an animal. The breathing was too deliberate, too controlled, too human. I fumbled for my knife, the only weapon I had, and held it in front of me as I backed slowly toward my tent. "I know you're there," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't want any trouble." A chuckle answered me, soft, amused, and definitely human. It came from directly behind me. I whirled around, knife extended, but there was nothing there, just the dark outline of my tent against the starry sky. The breathing had stopped. The forest remained deathly quiet. I stood frozen for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, straining to hear any sound, to see any movement in the darkness. Nothing came. Eventually, the normal night sounds resumed. A cricket here, a frog there, gradually building back to the usual nocturnal chorus. Had I imagined it? Was I so used to city noise that the profound silence of the deep woods had played tricks on my mind? I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my tent, knife in hand, jumping at every sound until dawn broke over the eastern ridge, painting the sky in pinks and golds. Only then did I allow myself to relax slightly. In the light of day, last night's fear seemed ridiculous. I'd let my imagination run wild, that's all. I made coffee on my camp stove and studied my map, planning the day's hike. According to my route, I'd reach Black Rock Summit by late afternoon, a challenging climb but worth it for the panoramic views. I broke camp efficiently and was on the trail by 8 a.m. The forest felt welcoming again in the morning light, birds singing, squirrels chattering as they darted between trees. I began to think I'd overreacted the night before, until I saw the footprints. They circled my campsite, large, boot-shaped impressions in the soft earth. They hadn't been there when I'd set up camp. Someone had walked around my tent while I was inside, watching. A cold knot of fear formed in my stomach. I wasn't alone out here. I considered turning back, retracing my steps to the trailhead in my car, but that would mean at least a full day of hiking, and whoever had left those prints might be anywhere. Ahead or behind, I had no way of knowing. I decided to continue as planned, but stay alert. I'd avoid my planned camping spots, which were marked on standard maps. Instead, I'd find unmarked clearings off-trail where no one would expect me. The day's hike was more challenging than I'd anticipated. The trail grew steeper, rocky in places, requiring careful footing. By noon, dark clouds had gathered over the western ridge, promising rain. I picked up my pace, hoping to reach higher ground before the storm hit. The first fat raindrops began to fall as I was navigating a particularly tricky rock scramble. Within minutes, it was a downpour. I quickly pulled on my rain jacket, but it was too late. I was already soaked. The temperature dropped rapidly and the trail turned slick and treacherous under my boots. I needed shelter, and fast. According to my map, there was a designated camping area with a lean-to about 2 miles ahead, but in this weather, that felt impossibly far. Then I remembered the cabin I'd passed the day before. It couldn't be more than a mile back, and at least it would be dry. I turned around, careful not to slip on the now muddy trail. The rain was coming down in sheets, reducing visibility to just a few yards ahead. Thunder boomed overhead, followed by a flash of lightning that temporarily turned the forest silver-white. It took me nearly an hour to find the cabin again, and by then I was shivering uncontrollably. My boots squelched with each step, and my supposedly waterproof jacket had surrendered to the deluge. The cabin looked exactly as I'd left it. Dark windows, empty porch. I approached cautiously, calling out again, though I doubted anyone would hear me over the storm. "Hello? Is anyone there? I need shelter from the rain." No answer. I tried the door, expecting it to be locked, but the handle turned easily in my grasp. The door swung open with a creak that raised the hairs on the back of my neck. Inside, it was dry and surprisingly warm. The cabin consisted of a single room with the wood stove I'd seen through the window, the small table and chairs, and a narrow bed in one corner. A kerosene lamp sat on the table next to a box of matches. There was a stack of firewood beside the stove, dry and ready to use. It looked like someone had prepared the cabin for a visitor. For me. I hesitated in the doorway, rainwater pooling around my feet on the wooden floor. Something felt wrong here, but the alternative was hypothermia. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The silence was immediate and complete, the thick walls muffling the sound of the storm outside. I stood dripping on the floor, suddenly aware of how vulnerable I was. I was miles from any help, in a strange cabin that wasn't on any map, with night approaching and someone who might have been watching me the night before. But I was also cold, wet, and exhausted. I needed to get dry and warm. I stripped off my wet clothes and hung them near the stove, which I carefully lit using the dry wood and matches. Soon, a cheerful fire was crackling, radiating blessed heat into the small space. I put on my spare clothes, thermal leggings and a long-sleeved merino wool shirt that I'd kept dry in a waterproof stuff sack in my backpack. As the cabin warmed up, I began to relax slightly. I lit the kerosene lamp and examined my surroundings more carefully. The shelves held basic supplies: canned beans, coffee, sugar, salt, flour, a few battered paperbacks with cracked spines, a deck of cards. Normal things you'd expect in a hunting cabin. On closer inspection, though, I noticed something odd. There was no dust. Everything was clean and orderly, as if someone had just tidied up that morning. Someone was maintaining this place regularly. I checked the wood stove. The ashes inside were fresh, from a fire that couldn't be more than a day old. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with my wet clothes. Someone had been here very recently. They might come back. I looked at the door. There was no lock, just a simple wooden latch. I could block it with the table, but that wouldn't stop anyone determined to get in. Outside, the storm continued to rage. Night was falling fast, darkness gathering in the corners of the cabin despite the small fire and lamp. I had a decision to make: stay here and risk meeting whoever maintained this place, or venture back into the storm and try to find another shelter. The thought of going back into that downpour made my decision for me. I would stay, but I would be ready to leave at the first sign of trouble. I moved the table in front of the door, not enough to block it completely, which might seem hostile if the owner returned, but enough to wake me if someone tried to enter. I ate some of my trail food, not wanting to use the supplies in the cabin, and settled onto the narrow bed, fully clothed with my boots on, pack ready beside me. I kept my knife under my pillow, easily accessible. Despite my unease, exhaustion soon pulled me towards sleep. The warmth of the cabin, the rhythmic drumming of rain on the roof, the soft crackling of the fire, all conspired to make my eyelids heavy. I don't know what woke me. A sound, a change in the air, or just that animal instinct that tells you when you're not alone. The fire had died down to embers, casting a dull red glow across the cabin. The rain had stopped, and in the silence, I could hear breathing. Not my own. Someone was in the cabin with me. I lay absolutely still, keeping my breathing deep and regular, feigning sleep. My hand inched toward the knife under my pillow. A floorboard creaked, and I sensed rather than saw movement in the shadows beyond the dying fire. Someone was standing at the foot of the bed watching me. My fingers closed around the handle of my knife, and in one fluid motion, I sat up, blade extended in front of me. "Stay back," I shouted. "I have a knife." The figure didn't move. It stood perfectly still in the shadows, just beyond the reach of the firelight. I couldn't make out features, just a dark silhouette. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking despite my efforts to sound confident. "What do you want?" The figure took a step forward into the dim glow of the embers. I saw the outline of a woman, tall, thin, with long hair that hung in wet tangles around her face. She wore what looked like a simple dress, dark with moisture. "You're in my home," she said, her voice surprisingly soft and melodic. "But I don't mind. It's been so long since I've had a visitor." I kept the knife pointed at her. "This is your cabin?" "It was," she said, taking another step closer. Now I could see her face, pale, with high cheekbones and eyes so dark they appeared as holes in her face. "A long time ago." "I'm sorry," I said, not lowering my knife. The storm was bad. I needed shelter. "I know," she replied, her head tilting slightly as she studied me. "I watched you come up the path. You looked so cold, so lost, like I was." Something about her made my skin crawl. The way she moved too smoothly, the way her dress seemed to shimmer between bone-dry and soaking wet as the firelight flickered. "I'll leave in the morning," I said firmly. "First light." She smiled then, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too numerous. "But the storm isn't over. It's just beginning." As if to confirm her words, thunder rumbled in the distance. "Who are you?" I asked again, my mouth dry with fear. "They called me Eleanor Blackwood," she said, moving to sit in one of the chairs by the cold wood stove. Water dripped from her dress onto the floor, forming a small puddle. "This was my family's land, once, before they took it." "Who took it?" Her smile vanished, replaced by a look of such hatred that I recoiled. "Men from the town. They said we were practicing witchcraft. They came in the night, dragged us from our beds. My parents, my sisters, they hanged them at the edge of town for all to see." I swallowed hard. "And you?" "I ran," she said simply, "into these woods. For days they hunted me with dogs and guns. I found this cabin. It was abandoned even then. I hid here, but they found me." Her hand went to her throat, where I now saw a dark line, like a bruise. "They strung me up from that very beam." She pointed above us, and I reluctantly looked up. There, in the center of the ceiling, was a heavy wooden beam with a deep groove worn into it, as if something had been hung there for a very long time. "That's a terrible story," I said, lowering my knife slightly, "but it must have happened a very long time ago." 173 years, she said, her voice emotionless. "I've counted every day." Ice formed in my veins. This woman was clearly delusional. Dangerous, possibly. I needed to get out of here. "I think I should go," I said, reaching slowly for my pack. "The rain seems to have stopped." "It's not safe out there," Eleanor said, looking toward the window. "Not at night. They still hunt these woods." "Who does?" "The men who killed me. Their sons. Their grandsons." Her eyes, those bottomless dark pits, fixed on me again. "They're looking for you now." A chill ran through me. "What do you mean?" "I've watched you since you entered my forest," she continued as if I hadn't spoken. "You're different from the others, stronger, more suitable." "Suitable for what?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Eleanor stood, water continuing to drip from her dress, though she'd been sitting by the stove for several minutes now. "I'm so tired of being alone," she whispered. "So tired of walking these woods with no one to talk to, no one who can see me except those I choose." She moved toward me, and I raised my knife again. "Stay back!" She stopped, looking at the blade with mild curiosity. "That can't hurt me. Nothing can anymore. That's the curse. To walk these hills forever, unable to leave, unable to rest." "You're not real," I said, my voice breaking. "You're a hallucination, or a dream. I fell asleep, that's all." "Cut me, then," she challenged, extending her arm. "See if I bleed." I didn't move. I didn't want to touch her, didn't want to confirm whether she was solid flesh or something else entirely. She lowered her arm, smiling that too-many-teeth smile again. "I've chosen you, Rebecca Hill. You'll stay with me, forever." My blood ran cold. I hadn't told her my name. "How do you know who I am?" I whispered. "I know everything about you," she said, moving to the door and running her fingers over the wooden latch. "I read it in your belongings while you slept. Rebecca Hill, age 29, from Richmond. Marketing specialist. Allergic to penicillin. Emergency contact. Maya Chen." She turned back to me. "No one will miss you for days. By then, the transformation will be complete." I lunged for my pack, grabbing it and backing toward the window on the opposite side of the cabin. "I'm leaving, now." "The forest isn't safe at night," she repeated, still blocking the door. He's out there." "Who is?" "The woodsman," she said, glancing nervously at the window. "He hunts my kind. And now he'll hunt you too." As if on cue, a sound came from outside, the distinctive crack of a branch being deliberately broken. A warning. Eleanor's face contorted with fear. "He's come. He always knows when I've found someone new." She moved away from the door, pressing herself against the wall beside it. "Hide," she hissed at me. "If he finds you with me, he'll kill you too." Before I could respond, something heavy struck the door. Once, twice, 3 times. The whole cabin shook with each impact. Eleanor was now pressing herself into the corner, making herself as small as possible. Her form seemed to flicker in the dim light, sometimes solid, sometimes transparent, like a bad television signal. The pounding stopped. Silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. Then the door exploded inward, the table I'd placed against it skidding across the floor. In the doorway stood a massive figure, easily 6.5 feet tall, broad-shouldered, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned greatcoat that hung to his knees. His face was hidden in the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat, but I could see the gleam of eyes beneath it and the darker gleam of something in his hand, an axe with a long, curved blade that caught the dying firelight. "Where is she?" The voice was deep, gravelly, with an accent I couldn't place, old-fashioned like something from a historical film. I couldn't speak. Terror had frozen my vocal cords. The woodsman stepped into the cabin, his heavy boots thudding on the wooden floor. "I can smell her," he growled. "The witch. She's here." My eyes flicked involuntarily to the corner where Eleanor cowered, now barely visible, her form growing more transparent by the second. The woodsman followed my gaze, lifting his axe. "Ah, there you are, Eleanor, still hunting innocent travelers. I see." "She's mine," Eleanor hissed, her voice now distorted, inhuman. "I found her. She'll join me." "Not while I draw breath," the woodsman replied, advancing on her. Eleanor's form abruptly solidified. She straightened to her full height, her face contorting into something monstrous, eyes now glowing red, mouth stretching impossibly wide to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. "You can't stop me," she snarled, her voice now a multi-toned abomination that made my ears hurt. "I've taken dozens before her. I'll take dozens after. This forest is mine." The woodsman lunged forward with surprising speed for his size, his axe sweeping in a deadly arc. Eleanor moved like smoke, flowing around the blade, her fingers extending into claws that raked across the woodsman's chest, tearing his coat. I used their distraction to edge toward the door, clutching my pack to my chest. Neither of them seemed to notice me. They were locked in their battle, moving with impossible speed around the small cabin. The wood stove toppled with a crash, spilling embers across the floor. Small fires bloomed on the wooden planks. I reached the doorway just as Eleanor let out an inhuman shriek. The woodsman had her pinned against the wall, the shaft of his axe pressed against her throat, just below the dark bruise-like mark. "Run!" he bellowed without looking at me. "Get to the ridge before dawn. Don't stop. Don't look back. Go!" I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted out the door into the night, the sounds of their struggle fading behind me as I crashed through the underbrush, abandoning the trail in my panic. The forest was pitch black, but fear gave me a strange clarity. I oriented myself by the stars when I could see them through the canopy, heading east toward Black Rock Summit. If I could reach it by dawn, maybe I'd be safe. Though from what, I wasn't sure anymore. I ran until my lungs burned, then walked quickly when I couldn't run anymore, then ran again when I caught my breath. Behind me, a glow appeared through the trees. The cabin, fully engulfed in flames now. I didn't slow down. Hours passed in a blur of fear and exhaustion. The forest seemed to close in around me, branches reaching like hands to snag my clothing, roots rising from the ground to trip me. More than once I fell, tearing my hands and knees on rocks and thorns, but I always got up and kept moving east, always east. As the first hint of dawn lightened the sky, I finally broke through the tree line onto the exposed rock of Black Rock Summit. Exhausted, I fell to my knees, gulping the cool morning air. The sun rose slowly over the eastern horizon, painting the landscape in gold. From this vantage point, I could see for miles in every direction: endless forest, valleys, distant ridges, and smoke, a thin column rising from where I guessed the cabin had been. Had any of it been real? The woman who called herself Eleanor, the menacing woodsman? Or had I experienced some kind of stress-induced hallucination, perhaps from exposure or dehydration? As the sun climbed higher, I pulled out my map with trembling hands. I needed to find the quickest route back to civilization. I'd had enough of solitude. That's when I noticed it. A mark on my left wrist just above my watch. A perfect circle with a vertical line through it, and 3 smaller circles within. The same symbol I'd seen carved into the post at the cabin. It looked like a brand, the skin red and raised as if burned. I stared at it in horror. It hadn't been there before. "She marked you." I jumped at the voice, whirling around. The woodsman stood at the edge of the summit where the trees met the open rock. In daylight, I could see him clearly. A weathered face with a salt and pepper beard, deep-set eyes that had seen too much. His greatcoat was torn and singed in places. He leaned on his axe like a walking staff. "What do you mean?" I asked, backing away from him. "What is this?" "Her mark," he said simply. "She claims those she wants to turn. Usually she completes the process before I can intervene. You're lucky. Turn into what? Something like her, a spirit bound to this forest, feeding on fear and misery." He moved closer, and I noticed he was limping. "The mark will fade in time, now that she's gone. For a while, at least. You killed her. Can't kill what's already dead," he said with a grim smile. "But I've sent her back to the darkness for a time. She'll return eventually. She always does." "Who are you?" I asked. "Why do you hunt her?" His eyes grew distant. "I was the one who found her, back when I was the local sheriff. I tracked her to that cabin after her family was hanged. I was different then. Cruel. I enjoyed the hunt too much." He looked down at his hands. "I'm the one who strung her up from that beam. Her curse was my punishment. To hunt her for eternity, to save those I can, and to remember my sins." He turned his gaze back to me. "Get off this mountain, Rebecca Hill. Go back to your city, your friends. Try to forget what you've seen here. The mark will fade, and with it, the memories will dull. How do I know you're not like her, another spirit or hallucination?" In answer, he reached out and took my hand. His skin was warm and calloused. Very human. He pressed something into my palm. "A protection," he said, "if you ever return to these woods." I looked down. It was a small wooden charm, intricately carved with symbols I didn't recognize, hanging from a leather cord. When I looked up again, he was gone. One moment, there, the next, simply not. Only disturbed pine needles at the forest's edge showed where he had stood. I clutched the charm tightly and began the long descent toward the trailhead in my car, the rising sun warm on my back. I've never returned to the George Washington National Forest, though the pull is there sometimes. A whisper on the wind, a face glimpsed in dreams. The mark faded after a month, leaving only a faint scar that most people mistake for an old vaccination mark. The charm hangs above my bed now, and on stormy nights when the wind howls around my apartment building, I sometimes think I hear a woman's voice calling my name. But I never answer. I know better now. The wilderness holds secrets darker than city dwellers can imagine. Dangers that don't appear on any trail map. Spirits that walk in the spaces between trees, looking for companions in their endless solitude. My name is Rebecca Hill, and I am 29 years old. This happened in the George Washington National Forest, Virginia, just last summer. And sometimes I still wake up at night, certain that if I opened my eyes, I'd see Eleanor Blackwood standing at the foot of my bed, water dripping from her dress onto my floor, smiling that too-many-teeth smile, waiting to finish what she started. My name is Sarah Rodriguez, and I am 31 years old. This happened in Sherwood State Forest, Virginia, just last summer. The drive to the trailhead had been deceptively pleasant. Sunlight dappled through the dense canopy of oak and poplar trees, and the winding roads of Sherwood State Forest welcomed us with their peaceful serenity. Our rental car's GPS had lost a signal twice already, but Emily had downloaded offline maps as a backup. That was Emily for you. Always prepared, always thinking ahead. "How much further?" I asked, rolling down the window to let in the crisp mountain air. Emily glanced at her phone. "About 15 minutes to the Devil's Backbone trailhead. Supposed to be gorgeous views from up there." "You said that about the last 3 places we looked at," I teased, but my smile was genuine. This trip had been Emily's idea. A week of hiking and camping in Virginia's Blue Ridge Mountains, away from the suffocating pressure of our corporate jobs in Chicago. Getting away from it all, she had called it. A chance to reconnect with nature and with each other, our friendship having weathered the storm of her divorce 6 months earlier. Little did I know how literal getting away from it all would become. We parked at the small gravel lot at the trailhead. Only 2 other cars were there. A beaten-up pickup truck with local plates and a sedan with a rental sticker like ours. I hoisted my backpack, adjusting the straps across my shoulders. It was heavy with 3 days' worth of supplies, but we'd practiced with weighted packs for weeks beforehand. Emily insisted we be ready. "The summit campsite is about 6 miles up," Emily said, studying the weathered trail map posted on a wooden board. "Should take us 4 hours, tops." I nodded, double-checking my boots were tightly laced. "Lead the way, fearless leader." The first 2 hours of the hike were everything we'd hoped for. The trail wound through dense forest before opening to stunning vistas of rolling mountains shrouded in that distinctive blue haze that gave the range its name. We stopped often to take photos, marveling at ancient rock formations and identifying wildflowers from the guidebook Emily had insisted on bringing. The trouble started around midday. Dark clouds rolled in with surprising speed, and the temperature dropped sharply. "That's strange," Emily frowned at her weather app. "The forecast said clear skies all week." Thunder rumbled in the distance, and I felt a peculiar sensation, a tightness in my chest that wasn't from the exertion of the hike. "Maybe we should head back," I suggested. Emily shook her head. "We're more than halfway to the campsite. Going back would take longer than pushing forward at this point." I wanted to argue, but the determination in her eyes stopped me. Emily needed this trip to work. She needed this victory after everything she'd been through with the divorce. The rain started 20 minutes later, a light drizzle at first, then quickly becoming a deluge. The trail turned slick with mud, and our pace slowed considerably. We pulled on rain gear, but it did little to keep us dry in the downpour. "There should be a shelter just ahead," Emily called over her shoulder, her voice nearly lost in the roar of the storm. We found the shelter, a simple 3-sided wooden structure with a sloped roof, just as hail began to pelt down. Huddled inside, we watched as marble-sized ice stones bounced off the ground outside. "Well, this is an adventure," I said, trying to keep my tone light as I wrung water from my ponytail. Emily didn't respond. She was staring out at the storm, her expression unreadable. "Em? Did you see that?" she whispered. "See what?" She pointed toward the tree line about 50 yards from the shelter. "I thought I saw someone." I peered through the gray curtain of rain but saw nothing except the dark shapes of trees swaying in the wind. Probably another hiker caught in the storm. "Maybe." But she didn't sound convinced. The storm passed as suddenly as it had arrived. Within 30 minutes the sky cleared, though the air remained oddly cold for June. We continued our hike, but the easy camaraderie of the morning had evaporated. Emily kept looking over her shoulder, and I found myself listening too intently to the sounds of the forest. We reached the summit campsite just before sunset. It was a small clearing surrounded by dense woods on 3 sides and a steep drop-off on the 4th that offered spectacular views of the valley below. A stone fire ring sat in the center of the clearing, and 2 primitive wooden platforms provided spaces for tents. "Looks like we have the place to ourselves," I said, relieved not to see any other hikers. Emily nodded, but her eyes were scanning the tree line again. "Let's get the tent up before we lose the light." Working quickly, we set up our 3-person tent and organized our gear. Emily tried to start a fire, but the wood was still damp from the rain, and it smoked more than it burned. The failing light cast long shadows across the campsite, and I found myself jumping at every snap of a twig in the surrounding forest. Night fell, and with it came a bone-deep cold that seemed to seep through my layers of clothing. We huddled in the tent, eating cold sandwiches by the light of our headlamps. "Not exactly the gourmet camping experience I promised," Emily said with a weak smile. "It's an adventure," I repeated my earlier sentiment, but the words rang hollow. Something felt off about this place, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. We crawled into our sleeping bags early, exhausted from the hike and the unexpected weather. I fell into a fitful sleep, plagued by dreams of being watched by unseen eyes. I woke suddenly in the middle of the night. The tent was pitch black, my headlamp had switched off, and Emily's steady breathing beside me told me she was still asleep. What had woken me? Then I heard it. A whisper, just outside the tent, so soft I almost thought I'd imagined it. "Help us." I froze, straining my ears. Had I dreamed it? Please, help. Definitely not a dream. The voice was childlike, plaintive. My heart hammered against my ribs. I reached for my headlamp, fumbling in the dark. My fingers closed around it and I clicked it on. Nothing happened. I tried again. Still nothing. The batteries had been new when we left Chicago. "Emily," I whispered, shaking her shoulder. "Emily, wake up." She stirred, mumbling something incoherent. "There's something outside," I hissed. That got her attention. She sat up, instantly alert. "What? What do you mean?" I heard a voice, a child's voice. Emily reached for her own headlamp. It didn't work either. "Batteries can't be dead," she muttered. "I just replaced them." The whisper came again, louder this time. "Help us, please." Emily stiffened beside me. I heard that. My mouth went dry. "What do we do?" "It could be someone in trouble," Emily reasoned, though her voice trembled slightly. "A lost hiker? Maybe. A lost child? All the way up here?" "We have to check," Emily said, already reaching for the tent zipper. "Wait," I grabbed her arm. What if it's not someone who needs help?" Emily hesitated. What else would it be? I didn't have an answer that didn't sound ridiculous. A trick? A trap? Some kind of mountain predator that could mimic human voices? But Emily was right. We couldn't ignore a call for help, especially if it was a child. Emily unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside. The night was clear now, a full moon casting silver light across the campsite. Nothing moved in the clearing. "Hello?" Emily called softly. "Is someone there?" Silence answered her. She opened the tent wider and stepped out, grabbing her hiking boots. I followed reluctantly, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give away our position to whatever was out there. The air outside was unnaturally still and even colder than before. Our breath formed white clouds in front of our faces. "Hello?" Emily called again, louder this time. "We heard you. Do you need help?" The whisper came from the tree line to our right. "This way. Follow." A small figure stepped out from between the trees, the silhouette of a child, no more than 8 or 9 years old. In the moonlight, I could make out a simple dress and long hair, but the face was in shadow. "Are you lost?" Emily took a step toward the figure. "Where are your parents?" The child retreated back into the trees. "Follow." Emily started forward, but I grabbed her arm again. Wait. This doesn't feel right." "We can't leave a child out here alone," she insisted, pulling away from me. "But how would a child get up here by themselves? The trail is challenging even for experienced hikers." Emily hesitated, looking back at the tree line where the figure had disappeared. Maybe they're with someone. Maybe there was an accident. A branch snapped in the darkness, and the whisper came again, more insistent. "Please, hurry." "I'm going to check," Emily decided. "You can stay here if you want." "Like hell I'm staying alone," I muttered, shoving my feet into my boots. "But I'm bringing this." I grabbed my hiking pole, the closest thing to a weapon we had. Emily nodded grimly, picking up her own pole and a flashlight, though it cast only a weak yellow beam through the darkness. We approached the tree line cautiously. The forest beyond was a wall of black, the moonlight unable to penetrate the dense canopy. "Hello?" Emily called again. "We're here to help." "Where are you?" A giggle echoed from somewhere in the darkness, followed by the sound of light footsteps moving away from us. "Wait," Emily called, pushing into the trees. I followed close behind her, the weak beam of the flashlight barely illuminating the narrow game trail we found ourselves on. The forest closed around us, branches reaching out like gnarled fingers to catch at our clothes and hair. The trail twisted and turned, leading us deeper into the woods. The only sounds were our labored breathing and the occasional giggle or whisper that seemed to come from just ahead, always just out of sight. "Emily, stop!" I gasped after what felt like an eternity of walking. "This isn't right. We're going to get lost." She paused, looking around with growing uncertainty. "I thought they were just ahead." "We need to go back," I insisted. "We can report this to the park rangers in the morning. They're equipped to handle search and rescue." Emily bit her lip, clearly torn. Another giggle, closer this time, made the decision for her. "It's just a little further," she said, pushing ahead. The trail suddenly opened onto a small clearing. In the center stood a ramshackle cabin, its windows dark, its wooden walls weathered by time and elements. It looked abandoned, yet somehow not quite empty. "Hello," Emily called, approaching the cabin. "Is anyone here?" No answer came, but the cabin door stood slightly ajar, a sliver of deeper darkness within. "We should go," I whispered, a sense of dread washing over me. "Emily, please." She ignored me, stepping onto the cabin's sagging porch. The weathered boards creaked ominously beneath her weight. "Hello," she called again, pushing the door open wider. "We heard you calling for help." I followed her reluctantly, my hiking pole gripped so tightly my knuckles ached. The cabin's interior was pitch black and smelled of damp earth and something else, something rotten. Emily's flashlight flickered, casting wild shadows across the single room. Crude furniture, a table, 2 chairs, a bed frame with no mattress, created hulking silhouettes. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams, and strange symbols were carved into the walls. "What is this place?" I whispered. "I don't know," Emily admitted, her confidence finally wavering. "But I don't think anyone's been here for a while." A giggle sounded directly behind us. We whirled around. The door slammed shut with a force that shook the entire cabin. "No!" Emily lunged for the door, tugging frantically at the handle. It wouldn't budge. "It's stuck," I joined her, pulling with all my strength, but it was like the door had been sealed shut or blocked from the outside. "The windows," I suggested, moving to the nearest one, but they were boarded up from the inside, the planks nailed securely to the frames. "This doesn't make any sense," Emily's voice rose with panic. "Who would board up windows from the inside?" A soft scratching sound began, first at the door, then moving around the cabin walls like claws or fingernails dragging slowly across the wood. Emily's flashlight flickered again, then died completely, plunging us into absolute darkness. "Sarah!" Emily's voice was small, frightened. "I'm here." I reached out, finding her hand. It was ice cold. "We'll find a way out." The scratching grew louder, more insistent. Then it stopped abruptly, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed against my eardrums. "You came." The whisper seemed to come from everywhere at once. No longer just a child's voice, but a chorus of whispers layered atop one another. "We've waited so long." "What do you want?" Emily's voice cracked with fear. "To not be alone anymore." The temperature in the cabin plummeted. My breath formed clouds in front of my face, visible even in the darkness. An unnatural glow began to emanate from the symbols carved into the walls, a sickly green light that revealed we were not, in fact, alone. Figures stood around the edges of the room, translucent, wavering forms that might once have been human. Men, women, children, dozens of them, their faces hollow-eyed and mournful. In the center of the room, directly in front of us, stood the child we had followed, a little girl in an old-fashioned dress. But in the green light, I could see what the moonlight had hidden. Her face was not a face at all, but a writhing mass of darkness with two glowing points where eyes should be. "Emily," I whispered, unable to look away from the apparition. "We need to run." "Where?" she hissed back. "There's nowhere to go." The not child took a step toward us, the darkness that was its face stretching into something that might have been a smile. "Stay with us," it whispered. "Forever." The other figures began to move forward as well, reaching out with misty, insubstantial hands. Emily screamed, backing away until she hit the wall. I stood frozen, unable to tear my eyes away from the approaching horrors. This wasn't happening. Couldn't be happening. Ghosts weren't real. This was some kind of hallucination, a shared delusion brought on by exhaustion or hypothermia, or... Cold fingers brushed my cheek. I felt it, actually felt it, the touch of something that should not exist. I jerked away, accidentally slamming my shoulder into the wall behind me. Pain shot through my arm, but with it came a sudden realization. One of the boards covering the window had shifted when I hit it. "Emily!" I gasped, tugging at the loose board. "Help me!" She scrambled to my side and together we pulled at the plank. It came free with a screech of rusty nails. Moonlight spilled through the narrow opening, cutting through the green glow. The figures recoiled from the natural light, their forms becoming less distinct. "Another one," I urged, grabbing the next board. Emily caught on, and we worked frantically, ignoring the wails of anger that now filled the cabin. The boards were old and partially rotted, easier to remove than they should have been. "Stop!" The voice was no longer a whisper, but a scream that seemed to shake the very foundations of the cabin. The not child lunged forward, its face splitting open to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. Emily managed to pull free the last board, revealing a window just large enough for us to squeeze through. "Go!" she shouted, pushing me toward the opening. I clambered onto the sill, feeling the cold touch of spectral hands trying to pull me back. The not child was mere inches away, its maw open impossibly wide. I tumbled through the window, landing hard on the ground outside. Emily followed a second later, her shirt torn, her face scratched but alive. We ran. Through the dark forest, blind with terror, branches whipping our faces, roots tripping our feet. Behind us, wails of fury faded into the distance, but we didn't slow down. Somehow, miraculously, we found our way back to the campsite. "The tent!" Emily gasped, already grabbing her backpack. "Get the tent. We need to go." "Now!" I panted, my lungs burning from the run. "In the dark? We can't stay here." Her eyes were wild with fear. "They'll come for us." I couldn't argue with that. In record time, we packed up our gear and struck out for the trail, using the moonlight to guide our way. The descent was treacherous in the dark, but fear drove us forward, down the mountain at a pace that was just short of suicidal. We reached the car as the first light of dawn broke over the eastern horizon. Without speaking, we threw our packs in the trunk and sped away from Sherwood State Forest, not stopping until we reached the small town of Rosedale, 20 miles away. In a diner there, over cups of coffee that neither of us really wanted, Emily finally spoke. "What?" Her voice cracked and she swallowed hard before continuing. "What was that?" I shook my head. "I don't know. A hallucination, maybe. Carbon monoxide from a natural gas pocket, or some kind of toxic fungus spores." But even as I listed rational explanations, I knew neither of us believed them. What we had seen, what we had experienced, defied rational explanation. "Did you notice the symbols?" Emily asked quietly. "On the walls of the cabin?" I nodded slowly. They had seemed familiar somehow, though I couldn't place where I might have seen them before. "I think," Emily hesitated, "I think they were protective symbols, but not to keep things out, to keep things in." A chill ran down my spine. "You think we released something?" "I don't know." She stared into her coffee cup as if it held answers. "But there's something else. Something I didn't tell you." I waited, dreading what might come next. When we were running, I looked back once, just for a second. The cabin, it wasn't there anymore. Just trees, like it had never existed at all. We didn't speak much after that. We checked into a motel in Rosedale, showered, slept in shifts because neither of us wanted to be unconscious at the same time. The next day, we drove to the nearest park ranger station to report what had happened, or a version of it, stripped of the supernatural elements that would have labeled us as lunatics. The ranger, a weathered man named Dawson with deep lines etched into his sun-browned face, listened politely to our edited tale of getting lost and finding an abandoned cabin. "There's no cabin in that area," he said when we finished. "Not for at least 50 years. "What was there 50 years ago?" Emily asked, her face pale. Ranger Dawson hesitated, glancing between us. "Nothing good," he finally said. "Back in the 1970s, that area was the site of a tragedy. A woman named Eliza Blackwood lived in a cabin up there with her daughter. Local rumors said she practiced witchcraft, communed with spirits. One winter, hikers found them both dead. The official ruling was exposure, but..." He trailed off. "But," I prompted, "the locals had other theories. Said Eliza had been trying to open a doorway to the spirit world, to speak with her husband who'd died in the mines. Some say she succeeded too well, opened something that shouldn't have been opened. The cabin was demolished after that. The wood burned. That summit was closed off for years, only reopened for camping in the late 90s. Emily and I exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between us. "Has anyone else reported strange experiences up there?" I asked carefully. Ranger Dawson studied us for a long moment. "Occasionally," he admitted. "Mostly experienced hikers who should know better than to follow strange lights or voices into the woods at night." His words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. "I'd recommend you ladies stick to the marked trails from now on," he said finally, "and maybe carry some cold iron, just in case." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Old wives' tale, of course, but can't hurt." We left Virginia that afternoon. Neither of us had the stomach to continue our hiking trip, not with the memory of that night still so fresh. We barely spoke during the long drive back to Chicago, each lost in our own thoughts, our own attempts to rationalize what could not be rationalized. I've done research since then, countless hours spent in libraries and online forums, learning about the folklore of the Blue Ridge Mountains, about the spirits that supposedly dwell in those ancient forests, about Eliza Blackwood and her desperate attempt to breach the veil between worlds. And I've learned one thing that keeps me awake at night. The whispers don't stop once they've found you. They follow. They wait. They're patient. Last night, I woke to the sound of scratching at my bedroom window, 15 stories up in my Chicago apartment building. A child's giggle echoed in the darkness. "We found you," a familiar whisper said. "We'll always find you." I haven't heard from Emily in 3 weeks. Her phone goes straight to voicemail. Her apartment stands empty. Her family has filed a missing persons report. The police are baffled. No evidence of foul play, no financial activity, no passport usage, but I know where she is, or rather, what has her, and I know they're coming for me next. If you're planning a hiking trip to Sherwood State Forest, my advice is simple. Stay on the marked trails. Don't hike alone, and if you hear whispers in the night calling for help, for God's sake, don't follow, because the things that whisper in those woods are hungry, and they're patient, and they have all the time in the world to wait for you. They're waiting for me right now. I can hear them outside my door. Sarah, they whisper. Come play with us, Sarah, forever. And the worst part? Sometimes in the darkest hours of the night, I think I hear Emily's voice among them. My name is Emily Hall, and I am 27 years old. This happened in the remote western part of Shenandoah National Park, Virginia, 3 years ago, but the memories still haunt me every night when I close my eyes. My boyfriend Mark and I had been dating for just over a year, and we were at that stage where we were starting to discuss our future together. Mark was an experienced hiker who had traversed most of the major trails in Virginia. I was more of a novice, but I loved the outdoors and was eager to share in his passion. When he suggested a week-long backpacking trip along some of the more secluded parts of the Appalachian Trail that cut through the western edge of Shenandoah, I jumped at the chance. We'll start at Hogback Mountain Overlook, Mark had said, his eyes bright with excitement as he traced the route on his map. Then, follow the trail past Overall Run Falls and spend a few days exploring the backcountry around High Skull Hollow. There's some incredible scenery out there that most tourists never see. In retrospect, there was probably a good reason why most tourists avoided those areas. We began our hike on a crisp October morning. The autumn colors were in full display, painting the mountainsides in brilliant shades of crimson and gold. The air had that perfect fall crispness that made each breath feel clean and invigorating. Mark seemed to know every plant and bird we encountered, stopping occasionally to point out interesting flora or fauna. "Look, Em," he would say, crouching down to examine a mushroom or some unusual moss formation. "Did you know these are actually a complex network of organisms working together?" His enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself developing a deeper appreciation for the wilderness around us. By the end of our first day, we had covered about 12 miles of trail and set up camp near a small tributary of the Overall Run. As dusk fell, we cooked a simple meal over our portable stove and watched the stars emerge above the tree canopy. The forest around us grew quiet except for the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustle of nocturnal creatures in the underbrush. "I love how isolated it is out here," Mark said, poking at our small campfire with a stick. "It's like we're the only two people left in the world." I nodded, though a small part of me felt unsettled by how far we were from civilization. My phone had lost service hours ago, and the nearest ranger station was at least a day's hike away. "Did you hear that?" I asked suddenly, sitting up straight. "Hear what?" "I thought I heard singing. Like someone humming a tune." Mark tilted his head, listening. "Probably just the wind or water over rocks. Sound plays tricks out here in the wilderness." I tried to convince myself he was right, but the melody had seemed too structured, too deliberate to be natural. Still, as we crawled into our tent and zipped ourselves into our sleeping bags, exhaustion soon overcame my unease, and I drifted off to sleep. The next morning dawned foggy and much colder than the previous day. My sleeping bag was damp with condensation, and I shivered as I changed into my hiking clothes. Mark seemed unfazed by the conditions and was already busy preparing breakfast. "Weather report said it might drizzle today, but it should clear up by afternoon," he said, handing me a steaming cup of instant coffee. I took a sip, grateful for the warmth. "Did you sleep okay?" "Like a rock," he replied. "You tossed and turned a bit, though. Bad dreams?" I frowned, trying to recall. There had been something. A sense of being watched, of cold fingers brushing against my face in the darkness, but the details were already fading. "I don't think so," I said. "Just adjusting to sleeping outdoors, I guess." After breakfast, we packed up our gear and continued our journey. The trail grew steeper, narrower as we moved deeper into the backcountry. The fog persisted, limiting our visibility and lending an eerie quality to the forest around us. Twice I thought I saw movement in the trees, but when I turned to look directly, there was nothing there. By midday, we reached a fork in the trail that wasn't marked on our map. "That's odd," Mark muttered, looking back and forth between the map and the diverging paths before us. "According to this, there should only be one trail here." "Maybe it's a newer trail," I suggested. Mark shook his head. "Doesn't look like an official park trail. Probably just a game path or something made by other hikers." After some discussion, we decided to stick to the path that seemed more established, which veered slightly east of our original route. As we hiked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. Occasionally, I would hear what sounded like footsteps behind us, but when I stopped to listen, the sounds would cease. "Mark," I said finally, my voice tight, "I think there's someone following us." He stopped and turned, scanning the trail behind us. "I don't see anyone," he said after a moment. "Probably just an animal." "It doesn't sound like an animal. It sounds like a person trying not to be heard." Mark gave me a reassuring smile, but I could tell he was starting to get concerned about my state of mind. "Tell you what, let's take a break. We've been pushing pretty hard, and sometimes fatigue can make you imaginative." We found a small clearing just off the trail and sat down to rest and have a snack. As I bit into an energy bar, I noticed a strange marking carved into a nearby tree, a crude symbol that looked like a stick figure with an oversized head and too many limbs. "What do you think that is?" I asked, pointing. Mark walked over to examine it. "Probably just some kid's graffiti," he said, but he didn't sound convinced. "Though we are pretty far from any areas where families usually hike." As the day wore on, we encountered more of these strange symbols carved into trees along our path. Mark tried to dismiss them as coincidence or the work of previous hikers, but they were becoming too numerous to ignore, and they were getting more elaborate, some depicting what looked like scenes of violence, stick figures holding knives or axes, others lying prone with lines radiating from their bodies that could only be interpreted as blood. "Maybe we should turn back," I suggested as we stood before a particularly disturbing carving showing what appeared to be a human figure being torn apart. "We've come too far," Mark replied, though I could see the doubt in his eyes. "And it'll be dark soon. Better to find a good spot to camp and then reassess in the morning." We continued for another hour until we reached a small clearing near High School Hollow. It was a beautiful spot next to a babbling brook, surrounded by tall pines that offered some protection from the wind. Under different circumstances, it would have been idyllic. As we set up our tent, I noticed a strange arrangement of stones near the edge of the clearing. Dozens of small pebbles formed into the same stick figure pattern we had seen carved into the trees. When I pointed it out to Mark, he kicked at the formation, scattering the stones. "Just trying to freak us out," he muttered. "Probably some local kids who come up here to party." But we both knew we were too deep in the backcountry for this to be the casual work of teenagers. That night, as we huddled in our tent listening to the wind whistling through the trees, Mark finally admitted what I'd been feeling all day. "Something's not right here," he said quietly. "I've never seen those kinds of markings on any trail I've hiked before." "What do you think they mean?" I asked. He shook his head. "I don't know. But tomorrow we're going to head back to the main trail and make our way to the ranger station at Elk Wallow, just to be safe." I nodded, relieved that he was finally taking my concerns seriously. But as we lay in our sleeping bags, I couldn't help but wonder if we would make it to morning. Every sound outside our tent seemed amplified. The crack of twigs, the rustle of leaves, and what I could have sworn was the soft murmur of voices just beyond the nylon walls of our shelter. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because I was awakened by Mark shaking my shoulder urgently. "Emily," he whispered, his voice tight with fear. "Someone's out there." I sat up, instantly alert. "What? Who?" "I don't know. I heard footsteps circling the tent, but when I called out, nobody answered." We sat in tense silence, straining our ears. Then we heard it, a soft, rhythmic humming, the same melody I'd heard on our first night. It was closer now, just outside our tent, accompanied by the deliberate crunch of footsteps on fallen leaves. Mark reached for the flashlight and his pocket knife, the only weapons we had. The humming stopped, replaced by a sound that turned my blood to ice, a low, gurgling chuckle that no human throat could produce. Then came a voice, raspy and sibilant. "Visitors. It's been so long since we had visitors in the hollow." Mark's hand found mine in the darkness, squeezing it tight. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice remarkably steady despite the circumstances. No answer came, just more of that terrible chuckling, now seeming to come from multiple directions at once, as if we were surrounded. "What do you want?" Mark tried again. "Want?" The voice echoed, closer now, just outside the thin fabric of our tent. "We want what we always want. Company." A sharp object, a stick or maybe a blade, poked at the side of the tent, creating a small tear. Mark and I scrambled back against the opposite side. "We're with the Park Service," Mark lied desperately. "Rangers know exactly where we are and are expecting us to check in tomorrow morning." The chuckling grew louder. "No one knows you're here," the voice said with certainty. "No one ever knows when they wander into High School Hollow. That's why we chose it all those years ago." My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Had we stumbled onto some kind of backwoods cult? Or was this something even more sinister? Suddenly, the humming resumed, but now it was a chorus of voices, all slightly out of sync with each other, creating a discordant melody that seemed to make the air vibrate. The tent walls billowed inward as if pressed by unseen hands, and the temperature plummeted. My breath came out in visible puffs despite it being only October. "Mark," I whispered, "we need to run." He nodded grimly. "On 3, we unzip the tent and sprint. Don't look back, just run for the trail. Ready?" I nodded, my heart hammering against my ribs. 1, 2, 3. Mark unzipped the tent in one fluid motion, and we burst out into the clearing. What I saw in that moment will haunt me for the rest of my life. Surrounding our campsite were at least a dozen figures, but they weren't human. Not entirely. In the moonlight, I could make out emaciated forms with limbs too long and joints that bent in impossible directions. Their skin was a pallid gray, stretched tight over protruding bones, and their faces. Their faces were the worst part. They had features that approximated human, but everything was slightly wrong. Eyes too large and reflective, mouths that stretched ear to ear filled with needle-like teeth, noses that were just slits in the center of their faces. They stood perfectly still as we emerged, their heads cocked at identical angles like curious predators. Then, as if given some unseen signal, they began to move toward us with a jerky, unnatural gait. Mark grabbed my hand and pulled me toward what we thought was the direction of the trail. We crashed through underbrush, branches whipping at our faces, the sounds of pursuit close behind. The creatures made no effort to be quiet now. Their movements were accompanied by that same gurgling chuckle and occasional bursts of their discordant humming. We ran blindly in the darkness, having dropped our flashlight in the initial panic. The moon provided just enough light to avoid running straight into trees, but it was impossible to tell if we were heading toward the trail or deeper into the wilderness. "There," Mark gasped, pointing ahead. "I think I see the trail marker." I squinted in the direction he was pointing and could just make out a reflective blaze on a distant tree. We pushed ourselves harder, racing toward it like a lighthouse in a storm. Behind us, one of the creatures let out a high-pitched shriek that sounded almost like frustration. They were falling behind, seemingly reluctant to follow us beyond some invisible boundary. We reached the tree with the trail marker and paused briefly to catch our breath. Looking back, I could see their silhouettes at the edge of a clearing, swaying slightly but not advancing further. "Why aren't they following?" I panted. "I don't know," Mark said, "but let's not stick around to find out." We continued along the trail at a brisk pace, constantly checking behind us for any sign of pursuit. After about half an hour, we came to a small wooden footbridge crossing a ravine, a structure that suggested we were back on an official park trail. "We must have taken a wrong turn yesterday," Mark said as we crossed the bridge. "Somehow wandered off the main trail without realizing it. But we both knew that wasn't true. The map had been wrong or deliberately misleading. Those things had wanted us in High Skull Hollow." We hiked through the night, too afraid to stop. As dawn broke, we reached a more heavily trafficked section of the Appalachian Trail and finally encountered other hikers, a middle-aged couple from Maryland who looked concerned at our disheveled appearance and wild eyes. "Are you folks okay?" the man asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Mark and I exchanged glances. "We just had a rough night," Mark said eventually. "Got a bit turned around in the backcountry." "Not surprised," the woman said sympathetically. "There are areas of this park even the rangers avoid, especially around High Skull Hollow." I felt my blood run cold. "What do you mean?" The couple exchanged a look similar to the one Mark and I had just shared. "Just old stories," the man said finally. "Disappearances going back 100 years or more. They say the High Skull family used to have a homestead out there, before the park was established. The story goes they were practitioners of some kind of old-world folk magic. There was trouble with their neighbors, accusations of stealing livestock for sacrifices, children going missing. Eventually, a posse went out there to confront them." "What happened?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "The posse never came back," the woman said quietly. "Another, larger group went out a week later and found the High Skull place abandoned. No sign of the family or the men who had gone looking for them, but they did find evidence of rituals, things they wouldn't describe when they came back. They burned the homestead to the ground and forbade anyone from settling in that hollow again." "That's just an old ghost story," Mark said, but his voice lacked conviction. The man shrugged. "Maybe so, but park rangers still won't go into that part of the park alone, and there are at least 3 hikers reported missing in that area every decade." We thanked them for the information and continued on our way, eager to reach civilization. Neither of us spoke much as we hiked. What was there to say? We both knew what we had seen, even if we couldn't explain it. By late afternoon, we reached the Elk Wallow Ranger Station and reported that we had gotten lost but managed to find our way back to the trail. We deliberately omitted any mention of High Skull Hollow or what we had encountered there. Who would believe us? And what if they did believe us? Would they want to go investigate? I couldn't bear the thought of leading others into that place. As we were preparing to leave, the park ranger, a weathered man in his 50s named Jim Bradshaw, pulled us aside. "You two came from the western backcountry, didn't you?" he asked quietly. We nodded hesitantly. "Did you, by any chance, pass through High Skull Hollow?" Mark and I exchanged glances. "We might have," Mark admitted after a pause. "Our map didn't label it clearly." Ranger Bradshaw's face grew grave. "You're lucky to be standing here," he said. "Not many come out of that hollow once night falls." "So it's true?" I asked. "The stories about that place?" "I've been a ranger here for 27 years, he replied. "In that time, I've seen things in these mountains that have no explanation. The hollow is the worst of it. We've had search parties go missing trying to find lost hikers there." "Why isn't the area marked?" "Closed off," Mark demanded, anger creeping into his voice. "It is, on official park maps," Bradshaw said. "But the markers at the trailheads keep disappearing. And, as for closing it off," he shook his head. "We've tried. Fences, barricades, warning signs. They never last more than a few days. It's as if the hollow doesn't want to be contained." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Whatever you saw or experienced out there, don't talk about it too much. It draws attention, their attention. The high schools might be long gone, but something of them remains, something that doesn't like being discussed. With that cryptic warning, he walked away, leaving us to digest his words. We caught a shuttle back to our car at the Hogback Mountain overlook and drove home in relative silence, both lost in our own thoughts. That night, safely back in my apartment, I took the longest, hottest shower of my life, trying to wash away the feeling of the hollow that seemed to cling to my skin like an invisible film. Mark called later that evening and we talked for hours, trying to rationalize what had happened. Maybe we had hallucinated the whole thing, some kind of toxic fungus in the air or contaminated water causing shared delusions. Maybe we had simply encountered some backwoods people playing a cruel prank on hikers. We came up with a dozen explanations, each less convincing than the last. In the following weeks, I threw myself into research, spending hours at the local library and online looking for any information about High School Hollow and its history. What I found was disturbing. The High School family had indeed existed, immigrants from an obscure region of Eastern Europe who had settled in the Blue Ridge Mountains in the late 1700s. Local records described them as reclusive, but initially friendly. Over time, however, rumors began to circulate about strange practices and rituals conducted on their remote homestead. Then came the disappearances. First livestock, then solitary travelers on the mountain roads, and finally children from nearby settlements. As the folktale recounted, a group of men from surrounding communities formed a posse and went to confront the high schools in 1853. When none returned, a larger armed group set out only to find the homestead deserted. What the second posse found inside the high school cabin was redacted from official reports, described only as scenes of such depravity and unnatural occurrence as cannot be committed to public record. They burned everything to the ground and salted the earth, following what one journal called the old ways to contain evil. There was more. Over the decades, dozens of disappearances had been documented in the area that became Shenandoah National Park, with a disproportionate number occurring within a 5-mile radius of where the high school homestead had stood. The most recent had been just last year, a solo hiker who had gone missing in almost exactly the same area where Mark and I had camped. The most disturbing information came from an obscure academic paper published in a journal of Appalachian folklore. It referenced the high schools as practitioners of something called the Hollow Way, described as a pre-Christian belief system involving communion with those who dwell between worlds and rituals to thin the veil between here and elsewhere. According to the paper, the practitioners believed that certain locations served as natural gateways or weak points between our world and something else. High School Hollow, with its unusual geographic features and alignment with certain celestial bodies at specific times of the year, was supposedly one such location. The paper also mentioned the stick figure symbols we had seen, calling them hollow men, representations of what the high schools supposedly became through their rituals. Neither fully human nor fully other, but something in between that could exist in both worlds. It was while reading this paper late one night that I first noticed the humming, that same discordant melody we had heard in the hollow, now seemingly coming from just outside my apartment window. When I looked outside, there was nothing there, but the next morning, I found a small arrangement of pebbles on my doorstep, formed into the now familiar stick figure pattern. I called Mark immediately, but there was no answer. Growing concerned, I drove to his apartment across town. His car was in the parking lot, but he didn't respond to my knocks. After 30 minutes of trying to reach him, I convinced the building manager to do a welfare check. We found Mark inside, sitting cross-legged on the floor of his living room, surrounded by dozens of those stick figure symbols drawn on papers scattered around him. He was humming that melody and didn't seem to register our presence at all. His eyes, when he finally looked up at me, were different. The pupils elongated vertically like a cat's or a reptile's. "They're coming," he said in a voice that wasn't quite his own. "They followed us back. The Hollow wants what was promised to it." He was committed to a psychiatric facility that day, diagnosed with acute psychosis. The doctors told me it was likely triggered by our traumatic experience in the wilderness, getting lost, the stress and fear activating some latent mental health condition. But I knew better. Whatever had been in Fictional Hollow had followed us home, or at least followed Mark. It had gotten inside him somehow. Perhaps during those moments when he had studied the symbols carved into the trees while I had urged him to move on. I visited him every day for weeks, watching him deteriorate despite medication and therapy. He would speak in that rasping voice that wasn't his, telling me that they were patient and had waited centuries for the right vessels. He said that Mark had been chosen because he had the sight, some innate sensitivity to the hollow and its inhabitants. Then, one night, Mark disappeared from the psychiatric ward. The security footage showed nothing. His room door opening and closing as if by itself, no figure visible entering or leaving. The police investigation turned up nothing. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air. I knew where he had gone, or at least where he was being taken. Back to the hollow. Back to them. For months afterward, I was tortured by nightmares of Mark being led through dark forests by those elongated figures, his movements becoming more and more like theirs with each passing day. In my dreams, his skin grew pale and stretched tight over protruding bones, his joints beginning to bend in ways they shouldn't, his mouth widening into that terrible grin full of needle teeth. I considered going back, trying to find him, to save him somehow. But deep down, I knew it was already too late. Whatever Mark had been, he was becoming something else now, something that belonged to the hollow. The humming outside my window continued sporadically for almost a year, along with the occasional arrangement of pebbles left where I would find them. I moved 3 times, even left Virginia altogether for a while, but they always found me. The symbols would appear drawn in condensation on my bathroom mirror or traced in the dirt on my car. Then, about 6 months ago, it all stopped. No more humming, no more symbols. At first, I was relieved, thinking perhaps whatever connection had been established was finally broken. But then, I realized the more terrifying possibility. They no longer needed to watch me, because they had what they wanted. Mark had fully transformed, had fully joined them. The transition was complete. Sometimes, on cold nights when the wind makes strange sounds around the corners of my house, I think I can still hear that humming. And sometimes, in my dreams, I see Mark, or what used to be Mark, standing at the edge of Fictional Hollow, his 2 long limbs swaying slightly, his impossibly wide mouth spreading into a grin as he beckons me to join him, to become what he has become. I will never return to Shenandoah National Park. I will never hike in those mountains again. But sometimes I fear I don't need to go back to the hollow. Sometimes I fear the hollow will eventually come for me. If you're planning a hike through Shenandoah, stick to the marked trails. Check your map carefully, and if you find yourself near a place called Fictional Hollow as the sun begins to set, turn back immediately. Run if you have to. And whatever you do, don't listen if you hear humming in the trees. Because once the hollow has marked you, it never truly lets you go. My name is Emily Hall, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the remote wilderness of Hungry Mother State Park in Virginia, just 3 months ago. I never should have gone camping alone. That's what everyone said afterward, their voices dripping with that special blend of sympathy and judgment reserved for those who survive their own foolishness. But they don't understand. They couldn't. The mountains had always been my sanctuary, the place where I felt most alive. After the divorce, I needed that connection more than ever. The trip was supposed to be a reset, a way to reclaim myself after giving 5 years of my life to a man who ultimately decided I wasn't enough. I'd been an avid hiker before meeting Derek, but somewhere along the way, I'd let that part of myself fade away. Now, I was determined to find it again, to prove I could still be the independent woman I once was. I chose Hungry Mother State Park for its remoteness and the local legends that surrounded it. The name itself had always fascinated me, supposedly derived from a tale of a woman who died of starvation after escaping Native American raiders, her child only able to utter "hungry mother" when found by settlers. It was macabre, yes, but there was something about confronting the darkness in stories that made my own problems seem more manageable. The first 2 days were everything I'd hoped for. The crisp October air, the explosion of fall colors, the absolute silence that can only be found deep in the woods. It was medicine for my wounded spirit. I set up camp near Molly's Knob, the highest point in the park, following a particularly strenuous hike that left my muscles pleasantly sore. My small one-person tent and the modest campfire I'd built felt like home in a way my empty apartment never had since Derek left. That second night, I sat beside my fire, notebook in hand, trying to capture my thoughts as darkness fell. The crackling flames cast dancing shadows across the pages, and occasionally, I'd pause to listen to the night sounds, the hooting of an owl, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, the whisper of wind through the trees. It was during one of these moments of silence that I first heard it, a sound that didn't belong, a voice, distant but distinct, calling out what sounded like a name. I froze, pen hovering above paper, straining to hear. "Margaret!" The voice was female, wavering on the night air. It came again, this time with a note of desperation that raised the hair on my arms. "Margaret, where are you?" I stood, scanning the darkness beyond my small circle of firelight. The voice seemed to be coming from the direction of the trail that led further up to Molly's Knob. My first instinct was concern. Someone might be lost, possibly injured. Night hiking was dangerous in these parts. It happened sometimes. Tourists underestimated the trails, didn't bring proper equipment, or didn't check their timing. "Hello," I called out. "Do you need help?" No response came, just the echo of my own voice bouncing back from the trees. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped cautiously beyond the perimeter of my camp. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but the familiar shapes of trees and boulders. "Hello?" I tried again, louder this time. "I'm down here. Follow my voice." Still nothing. The forest had gone eerily quiet, as if holding its breath. Even the night creatures had fallen silent. I was about to return to my camp when the voice came again, this time sounding closer. "Margaret, is that you?" A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the autumn air. Something was wrong with the voice. It sounded hollow, as if coming from the bottom of a well. And there was a quality to it that I couldn't quite place, something that made my instincts scream danger. "I'm not Margaret," I called back. "My name is Emily. Are you lost? Do you need help?" That's when I saw her, a figure standing at the edge of the trees, just beyond where my flashlight beam could properly reach. A woman, or what looked like one, wearing what appeared to be a long, old-fashioned dress. She stood perfectly still, her form barely discernible in the gloom. "Hello?" I took a step forward, raising my flashlight. "Are you okay?" The beam caught her face, and my blood turned to ice. Her skin was gray and waxy, stretched too tight over prominent cheekbones. Her eyes, God, her eyes were black pits that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. But it was her mouth that truly horrified me. It hung open at an impossible angle, dislocated like a snake preparing to swallow prey. I stumbled backward, nearly falling in my haste to retreat. My rational mind struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. A Halloween prank? Someone with severe injuries who needed medical attention? Or was my mind playing tricks, creating monsters from shadows? The figure suddenly moved, jerking forward in a way that was distinctly unnatural, like a marionette pulled by invisible strings. Her feet didn't seem to touch the ground. "Margaret," she rasped, and now I could hear the wrongness in her voice, the sound of someone trying to speak through a throat that had long since decayed. "You promised you'd come back." Flight instinct took over. I spun around and ran back to my campsite, heart pounding in my chest. Fumbling with trembling hands, I grabbed my phone from my tent. No signal, of course not. I was miles from the nearest cell tower. My car was parked at the trailhead, a good 4 miles away, and the idea of hiking there in the dark, possibly passing that thing, was unthinkable. I doused my fire and retreated into my tent, zipping it closed as if the thin nylon could provide any protection. I lay there in the darkness, straining to hear any sound of approach. My flashlight clutched in one hand, my small camping knife in the other. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time seemed to stretch and contract around me. Eventually, exhaustion overtook terror, and I fell into a fitful sleep filled with dreams of a woman calling through the trees, her jaw unhinged and reaching for me. I woke to daylight filtering through the tent fabric, momentarily disoriented. The memories of the night before came rushing back, but in the light of day, they seemed absurd. I'd let my imagination run wild, transforming a lost hiker into some kind of monster. The shame I felt was almost as powerful as the fear had been. I emerged from my tent, half expecting to see evidence of my midnight visitor, but the clearing looked exactly as I'd left it the evening before. The only unusual thing was that my fire pit, which I knew I'd doused thoroughly before retreating to my tent, was now a pile of white ash, the kind that forms only after a fire has burned extremely hot for hours. As I prepared a simple breakfast of instant coffee and oatmeal, I tried to rationalize what had happened. Stress, isolation, and darkness could play tricks on the mind. I'd heard of forest psychosis, a state where the quietness and isolation of remote wilderness could trigger hallucinations. That had to be it. Yet, a nagging doubt remained. The voice had sounded so real, so distinct, and those eyes. I decided to hike up to Molly's Knob, partly to clear my head and partly to prove to myself that I wasn't going to let one bizarre experience ruin my trip. The trail was steep but well-maintained, winding through dense forest before opening onto spectacular views of the surrounding mountains. About halfway up, I came across a small stone marker I hadn't noticed on previous hikes. Weather-worn and half-covered by moss, it seemed to be a grave marker of some kind. I brushed away the growth to reveal a simple inscription. Margaret Blackburn, 1873-1897. Lost to the Hollow. My heart skipped a beat. Margaret, the name the voice had been calling. It had to be a coincidence. Right? Pushing the thought aside, I continued my hike. The view from Molly's Knob was as breathtaking as always, the valley spreading out below me in a patchwork of autumn colors. I sat on a large flat rock eating my trail mix and trying to focus on the beauty around me rather than the unease churning in my stomach. That's when I noticed the old man. He was sitting on a rock about 50 yards away, gazing out at the valley. I hadn't seen him on my way up, which was odd considering the limited area of the summit. He was thin to the point of gauntness, with a long white beard and clothes that seemed a size too large for his frame. A walking stick rested across his knees. "Beautiful day," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the distance between us. I nodded, raising a hand in greeting. "It is." He stood with surprising agility for someone who appeared so elderly and made his way over to where I sat. Up close, his eyes were a startling blue against his weathered face, bright and alert. "Don't see many solo female hikers up here this time of year," he remarked, leaning on his walking stick. "Name's Tobias Mercer. Been hiking these mountains for over 60 years. "Emily," I replied, offering him some trail mix, which he declined with a wave of his hand. "I come up here whenever I need to clear my head." "Camping down by the old hollow?" he asked, gesturing vaguely in the direction of my campsite. I nodded. "How did you know?" He smiled, but it didn't reach those piercing blue eyes. "Saw your tent when I was coming up. Pretty spot, but I wouldn't have chosen it." Something about his tone made me uneasy. "Why's that?" Tobias looked out across the valley, his expression distant. "You saw the marker on your way up? For Margaret Blackburn?" I nodded, a chill running down my spine despite the warm sun. "Local history," he continued. Margaret was a young woman who came to these parts with her husband, Edwin, back in the 1890s. They were building a life out here, had a small cabin down in what folks call Blackburn Hollow now. Edwin would travel into town for supplies every few weeks, leaving Margaret alone. He paused, his eyes searching the distant mountains as if he could see the past laid out before him. One winter, Edwin went to town just before a terrible blizzard hit, got stranded there for nearly 2 weeks. When he finally made it back, Margaret was gone. Gone, I echoed, already knowing this story wouldn't have a happy ending. They found signs of a struggle in the cabin, blood on the walls, but no body. The assumption was that she'd been taken by either wild animals or wilder men. Tobias tapped his walking stick against the rock. But there's always been stories that she's still out there in some form, looking for someone to take her place so she can finally rest. My mouth had gone dry. What do you mean, take her place? Tobias finally looked at me, his gaze uncomfortably penetrating. Legend says she calls to women who are alone in the woods, calls them by her own name at first, confused-like. Then, if they answer, if they engage, she marks them, and she doesn't stop until she's taken them. I thought of the voice from the night before, calling for Margaret, the figure with the dislocated jaw. A chill washed over me despite the afternoon sun. That's quite a story, I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. Just a legend, Tobias said, his tone suddenly lighter. But these mountains are old, and they hold on to things. Memories, tragedies. He stood up straighter, adjusting his grip on his walking stick. You be careful down there in the hollow, Emily, and if you hear anyone calling in the night. He paused, fixing me with those unsettling blue eyes. Don't answer. With that, he nodded a goodbye and made his way back to the trail that led down the mountain, leaving me sitting there with a hollowness in my chest where calm had been just moments before. I stayed at the summit longer than I'd planned, reluctant to return to my campsite but knowing I didn't have much choice. I couldn't hike out before dark, and the idea of navigating those trails at night was even more frightening than returning to my tent. As I descended, I found myself looking for the grave marker again, but strangely, I couldn't locate it. The trail wasn't that wide. It should have been obvious. I even backtracked a bit, thinking I might have passed it, but there was no sign of the stone. By the time I reached my campsite, the sun was already beginning its descent behind the mountains. I had maybe 2 hours of daylight left. I busied myself gathering more firewood, determined to have a larger, brighter fire tonight. As I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that eyes were following me from the dense underbrush surrounding the clearing. I blamed Tobias and his ghost story. The power of suggestion was strong, especially in a place as inherently eerie as a remote forest. I was letting an old man's tale get under my skin, and I refused to give in to it. As twilight settled over the forest, I built my fire bigger than necessary, creating a wide circle of light that pushed back the encroaching darkness. I heated a packet of dehydrated chili over my small camping stove, but found I had little appetite. The conversation with Tobias and the memory of the previous night had left me on edge. After forcing down a few spoonfuls of chili, I gave up on eating and instead focused on maintaining my fire. I wasn't normally so wasteful with firewood, but tonight the thought of the darkness closing in was unbearable. The first strange occurrence was my water. I'd filled my bottle from a stream earlier that day, using my purification tablets as always. But when I took a sip now, it tasted wrong, metallic and thick like blood. I spat it out and held the bottle up to the firelight. The liquid inside looked normal, but when I cautiously sniffed it, the coppery scent of blood was unmistakable. I dropped the bottle, watching in horror as it rolled toward the edge of the firelight. Something was very wrong. My hands were trembling as I reached for my backpack, intending to grab my spare water bottle. Instead, my fingers touched something wet and sticky. I jerked my hand back, holding it up to the light. Blood. Fresh and glistening in the firelight, it coated my fingertips. I scrambled backward, knocking over my camping chair in my haste. My backpack sat where I'd left it, but it was now soaked in a dark liquid that could only be blood, dripping slowly onto the ground beneath it. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes, taking deep breaths, trying to center myself. When I looked again, my backpack was normal. No blood, no wetness. I was losing my mind. That was the only explanation. Stress, isolation, and that damn story were causing me to hallucinate. I needed to get out of there first thing in the morning. To hell with the remaining days of my planned trip. I wouldn't sleep in the tent tonight, I decided. Instead, I'd stay by the fire, keep it burning until dawn. Then I'd pack up and hike out as soon as there was enough light. The night grew deeper. The forest around me, normally alive with sounds, was unsettlingly quiet. No owls, no rustling of nocturnal creatures, not even the whisper of wind through the trees. Just the crackling of my fire and the sound of my own anxious breathing. And then, breaking the silence like a stone dropped into still water, came the voice. "Margaret." It was closer this time, just beyond the ring of firelight. I stiffened, eyes straining to see into the darkness. "Margaret, is that you? Have you come back for me?" My mouth went dry. The voice was coming from a different direction now, off to my right. I slowly turned, heart hammering in my chest. "I've been so alone, Margaret. You promised to come back." The voice changed locations again, now behind me. "You promised?" I spun around, and there she was, the same figure from the night before, but closer now, standing just at the edge of the firelight. Her impossible face was more visible in the glow of the flames, the skin pulled tight across her skull, the eyes bottomless pits of darkness. Her mouth hung open, distended in that horrible, unnatural way. "I'm not Margaret," I said, my voice breaking. "My name is Emily. Emily Hall." The figure tilted her head at an unnatural angle as if considering my words. "You're alone," she rasped. "Like I was. Like I've been for so long." She took a step forward, into the firelight, and I saw her clearly for the first time. Her dress was once white, perhaps a nightgown, now stained with earth and what looked disturbingly like dried blood. Her hands were clawed, the fingers too long, the nails blackened and sharp. But it was her movement that truly horrified me. Jerky and disjointed, like someone trying to manipulate a body they didn't fully understand how to control. "Please," I whispered, backing away. "I don't want any trouble. I'll leave in the morning. Just, please leave me alone." "I've been so hungry," she said, ignoring my pleas. So empty. "But you can help me, Emily Hall. You can take my place." She lunged forward with that unnatural speed, crossing the distance between us in a heartbeat. Cold, desiccated fingers wrapped around my wrist, burning like ice against my skin. I screamed, jerking back, but her grip was inhumanly strong. "Let me in," she hissed, her face inches from mine, her breath carrying the scent of grave soil and decay. "Let me wear your skin. Let me be warm again." In blind panic, I grabbed a burning branch from the fire with my free hand and swung it at her face. She shrieked, a sound no human throat could produce, and released me, recoiling from the flames. I didn't wait to see more. I ran, still clutching the flaming branch, crashing through the underbrush with no direction in mind except away. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me, but terror gave me a strange clarity, a heightened awareness that helped me navigate the night-dark forest. Behind me, I could hear her pursuit, not the sound of footsteps, but a weird, slithering movement through the trees that somehow kept pace with me despite my frantic sprint. "You can't escape, Emily Hall," her voice called, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "This is my hollow, my place." I realized with dawning horror that I was running deeper into the wilderness, away from the trail, away from any hope of reaching my car or finding help. But the alternative, turning back toward that thing, was unthinkable. My burning branch was fading. the flames dying down to embers. Soon, I would be in complete darkness, and the thought made my panic spike even higher. Then, ahead of me, I saw a light. Small and steady, it looked like a lantern or a flashlight. Someone else was out here. "Help!" I screamed, changing direction toward the light. "Please, help me!" The light grew brighter as I approached, and I could now make out the silhouette of a person holding what appeared to be an old-fashioned lantern. Hope surged through me. I wasn't alone out here after all. I burst into a small clearing where the figure stood, relief washing over me. "Thank God," I gasped, struggling to catch my breath. "There's something after me. Something—" I trailed off as the figure turned to face me. It was Tobias, the old man from Molly's Knob. He regarded me with those piercing blue eyes, his expression unreadable in the lantern light. "You shouldn't have come this way," he said quietly. "This is Blackburn Hollow." I glanced behind me, expecting to see the woman in pursuit, but the forest was still. "She's after me," I choked out. "That thing. She said she wants to take my place." Tobias nodded solemnly. "Margaret Blackburn, or what's left of her." He gestured to a dilapidated structure behind him that I hadn't noticed before. The remains of a small cabin, its roof mostly collapsed, its walls now little more than decaying timbers overtaken by vegetation. This was her home, where she waited for Edwin to return. A cold realization washed over me. You knew this would happen when you saw where I was camping. Tobias's eyes flickered in the lantern light. I watch, I wait, I guide, that's all. Guide who? Guide what? I demanded, anger momentarily overriding my fear. "She needs someone to take her place," he said as if explaining something obvious. "Someone alone, someone lost. Like you are, Emily Hall." The way he said my full name sent ice through my veins, exactly the same way she had said it. "What are you?" I whispered, taking a step back. Tobias smiled, and in the lantern light, his teeth looked too sharp, too numerous. "I tend to what grows in these mountains. The legends, the fears, the hungry things that need to feed." He lifted the lantern higher, and its light fell on something behind me. I turned, already knowing what I would see. She stood there, Margaret Blackburn, her jaw hanging impossibly wide, her empty eyes fixed on me. Behind her were others, shadowy figures with similar distorted features, dozens of them, forming a circle around the clearing. Around me. "They all answered her call," Tobias said softly. "Over the years, the decades, but none of them could take her place. None of them were right. But you might be," came Margaret's terrible voice, closer now. "You feel it too, don't you? The emptiness, the abandonment, the rage. And God help me, I did feel it. A resonance with this thing that had once been a woman, left alone, betrayed by someone who had promised to return, just as Derek had promised our marriage was forever, only to walk away when something better came along. "We're not the same," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. "Aren't we?" she rasped, reaching out one of those terrible clawed hands toward me. "Left alone, left behind, left to the hollow." I backed away, bumping into something solid, Tobias, who had moved behind me without a sound. His hands came down on my shoulders, holding me firmly in place. "It'll be easier if you don't fight it," he murmured, his voice almost kind. "The transition, the becoming." I drove my elbow backward, catching him in the ribs. He grunted in surprise, his grip loosening just enough for me to tear free. I ducked under Margaret's reaching arm and ran for the gap between two of the shadowy figures. They tried to grab me, their cold fingers brushing my skin as I burst through their line. I heard their wails of frustration, heard Tobias shout something in a language I didn't recognize. But I didn't stop, didn't look back, just ran blindly through the forest, branches tearing at my clothes and skin. I had no idea where I was going, no sense of direction in the pitch-black wilderness. I could be running deeper into the hollow, further from any hope of escape, but the alternative was to stop, to face what was behind me, and that was unthinkable. How long I ran, I couldn't say. My lungs burned, my legs trembled with exertion, but terror kept me moving. Behind me, I could hear them crashing through the undergrowth, those unnatural noises that weren't quite footsteps, that terrible slithering sound. Then my foot caught on an exposed root, and I went down hard, the impact knocking the breath from my lungs. I lay there, gasping, trying to force air back into my body, knowing I needed to get up, to keep running, but my limbs wouldn't respond. I rolled onto my back, looking up at the night sky visible through the canopy of trees. To my surprise, I could see stars, millions of them, more than I'd ever seen before, even in the mountains. They swirled and danced in impossible patterns, and I realized with a detached sort of horror that I was hallucinating, that the lack of oxygen and the extreme stress had pushed my mind to the breaking point. A face appeared above me, blotting out the dancing stars. Margaret Blackburn, her impossible features now inches from mine, her jaw unhinged like a snake about to consume its prey. "Let me in," she whispered, her cold breath washing over my face. "Let me be warm again. Let me out of the hollow." Her hand reached for my face, those blackened claws almost gentle as they stroked my cheek. I wanted to scream, to fight, but my body wouldn't respond, as if some essential connection between mind and muscle had been severed. "So much anger in you," she murmured, her voice almost tender now. "So much betrayal. We're the same, you and I. Left alone, left to hollow out from the inside." I felt something cold spreading from where her claws touched my skin, a numbness that crept downward. My vision began to darken at the edges. "This is what it felt like," she rasped, her bottomless eyes boring into mine. "When they came for me, when they took me, when they left me hollowed out and empty, waiting for Edwin to return. But he never came back. No one came back." The numbness was spreading faster now, up my neck, across my chest. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. All I could do was stare into those empty eyes as darkness crept across my vision. "But now I won't be alone anymore," she whispered, her face so close to mine that her words seemed to echo inside my head. "Now I'll wear your skin, walk in your world, and you'll take my place in the hollow." The darkness was almost complete now, just a pinpoint of light remaining. In that last moment of consciousness, I saw Tobias standing behind her, watching with those unnatural blue eyes, his expression one of patient satisfaction. Then the darkness took me completely. I woke with a start, gasping for breath, my heart pounding against my ribs. Early morning light filtered through the fabric of my tent, and for a long, disoriented moment, I had no idea where I was. Then it all came rushing back. The voice in the night, the figure with the dislocated jaw, Tobias and his warnings, the chase through the forest, the cold hands on my face. But I was in my tent, at my campsite. Not lost in Blackburn Hollow, not being consumed by some vengeful spirit. Just lying in my sleeping bag, drenched in sweat, the remnants of a nightmare still clinging to my consciousness. I sat up, running shaking hands through my hair. Had it all been a dream? A vivid, terrifying nightmare brought on by isolation and the power of suggestion. I unzipped the tent and stepped out into the crisp morning air. My campsite looked exactly as it had when I'd set it up. The remains of my modest fire from the night before, my camping chair, my backpack leaning against a tree. Nothing out of place, nothing unusual. Relief washed over me. A dream. That's all it had been. My subconscious mind processing my divorce, my feelings of abandonment, creating a horror story from those raw emotions. I walked over to my backpack, intending to get my toothbrush and begin my morning routine. As I reached for the zipper, I noticed something on my wrist, a discoloration, like a bruise. It was in the shape of fingers, wrapped around my wrist exactly where I'd dreamed Margaret Blackburn had grabbed me. My breath caught in my throat. A coincidence. I must have bumped into something during my hike yesterday, banged my wrist against a tree or rock. That was all. But then I noticed something else. A small piece of fabric caught on the zipper of my backpack. White cotton, aged and yellow around the edges, stained with what looked like dirt. The material was old, not something from any of my camping gear. It looked like it might have come from an antique nightgown. My hands shaking violently now, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. No signal. Of course, but I didn't need one to access my photos. I scrolled through the images from yesterday's hike, the sweeping vistas from Molly's Knob, the autumn foliage, a selfie I'd taken at the summit. In the background of that selfie, barely visible but unmistakable once I noticed it, was Tobias, standing on his rock, watching me with those piercing blue eyes. But there was something wrong with his image, a blurring around the edges, a transparency that shouldn't have been possible in a photograph, as if he wasn't fully there, as if he wasn't fully real. I dropped the phone, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. That's when I noticed the silence, the complete, absolute silence. No birds chirping, no rustling of leaves in the breeze, no small creatures moving through the underbrush. The forest around me was utterly still, as if holding its breath, waiting. I stood frozen, straining to hear anything, any normal sound that would anchor me to reality, that would prove I was still in the world I knew and understood. Instead, I heard a voice, distant but distinct, calling from somewhere deeper in the forest. My voice. "Derek, is that you? Have you come back for me?" And I knew with cold certainty that I had never left Blackburn Hollow, that what waited for me in these woods was something I would never escape. Not truly. I packed my things with methodical precision, breaking camp in record time. I would hike out, get in my car, drive away from this place and never return. I would seek help, therapy, medication, whatever it took to exorcise this experience from my mind. But as I shouldered my backpack and turned toward the trail that would lead me back to civilization, I caught a glimpse of movement among the trees, a flash of white fabric, a face that was both mine and not mine, watching with eyes that held nothing but hollow darkness. And I knew, with a certainty that transcended fear, that no matter how far I ran, the hollow would always be with me, inside me, waiting for someone else who was alone, who was lost, who could take my place, so I could finally rest. My name is Emily Hall. I am 32 years old, and I am still in the hollow.